Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku was a genius Playboy Philanthropist? Part 1. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
As a child, Izuku Midoriya had always been exceptionally intelligent. Like a sponge, he would absorb knowledge and apply it all. As his mother would merely grin at her son's pastime, his house was strewn with inventions and journals. It was quite unfortunate that he was found to be less eccentric. That day, it seemed like the entire world had turned against the boy. He was viewed as creepy and unnerving for his formerly kind and considerate interest. People would stay away from him as if he had the plague. But he never allowed them to defeat him. He never gave up. Nearly always, Izuku fanned his recently destroyed notebook and sighed. His former friend Katsuki Bakugo's thoughtless act of retaliation has now burned and trashed number 37. He watched helplessly as the explosive teenager instantly wrecked all of the previous month's worth of labor. To be honest, he didn't give a damn. It wasn't like he had lost anything because he routinely saved his data on his computer at night. He was simply irritated by his former friend's blatant lack of information. There was never any respect for the more sophisticated aspects of life. It was always hero this, hero that. Before placing the notebook back in his backpack, he glanced over its front one last time to be sure it was dry. He will need to begin recovering his notes from earlier today as soon as he gets home. He heard something behind him just as he was about to reach the underpass. After turning for a moment, he started running in the opposite direction. A being of sludge emerged from the manhole behind him. Izuku heard the sludge man start to creep around, so he hid beneath the bridge. The sludge man murmured, "Gotta hide, get away from him." Izuku suppressed a sigh. For even a moment, he was unable to escape this hero-villain insanity. His attention was drawn to the sound of another person. Izuku heard the hero say, "Halt villain, for it is I All Might." He slammed his skull against the bridge foundation. The villain was splattered across the road before he could even beg. As All Might scooped the last of it into two empty pop bottles and leapt away, Izuku stuck his head out. Izuku exhaled a sigh of relief at having managed to stay away from both of them. He sighed as he felt his skull's imprint in the brickwork and checked the wall he had struck his head against. He said, putting his notebook's ideas away as he drove on, "Might as well just get home." His mother was in the middle of testing a new dish when Midoriya walked through the door. Beside her was a little machine with a set of treads and multiple arms. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over to him, asking, Izuku, how was school?" Izuku answered, "Same as usual, how's PAM treating you?" "PAM had been such a big help around the house. I don't know how you managed to program so much into the little bot, but he's such a darling." Inko responded with a nod. Izuku followed his mother back into the kitchen and said, "Good to hear." As his mother recited the recipe to him, he saw PAM snatch each ingredient from its middle with a set of metallic limbs. One of his best works is PAM. He gave his mother a basic tool, the personal assistant machine, to help her cope with the stress of running the house and working her daily schedule. He was already in the process of obtaining a PAM warranty and making plans for extensive manufacturing and distribution. But that's for later. For now, he needs to watch PAM to make sure there aren't any deadly flaws. While his mother and PAM were still preparing dinner, he took out a new notebook and started transcribing the notes he had written today into it. Izuku was sleeping peacefully when he heard a loud crash. He got out of bed, grabbed a pair of slippers and a hoodie, and left his room. He entered the living room and saw his mother, who was terrified, staring out the window, PAM just behind her. "Hero fight?" inquired Izuku. As she moved away from the window, Inko retorted, "It's not far from here, and they're both throwing strong attacks every which way." Izuku positioned herself while observing the altercation. A villain with wild white flames was fighting a random hero who could make and fire balls of light. As he watched the two of them shoot explosive projectiles at each other, Izuku said, "Mom, get the fire extinguisher on hand. PAM be ready for fire mode." Before hitting one of the building's lower floors, one of their collisions rocketed upward. As PAM hurried to Inko's side on its treads, the entire place trembled. Izuku clenched his jaw and scowled out the window. As the structure trembled once more, he snarled, "Never a moment of normalcy." Izuku looked across at Inko. He said, "Mom, we need to get out now." Shocked, Inko leaned against PAM and nodded. As the structure trembled a third time, Izuku reached his mother's side and led them out. By this point, additional tenants were leaving the building before it collapsed. The three of them rushed as the building started to tilt. Tenants began to cluster together to flee the building as the stairs gradually became packed. PAM merely lifted Inko and started to descend the steps by treading on its lower arms. As the building rocked for the fourth time, the other inhabitants followed suit, many rushing down the stairs with their senior family members or youngsters. As soon as they left the building, PAM released Inko, and Izuku yelled, "PAM! Initiate mass evac mode." As the structure started to collapse, PAM hurried back inside. As Izuku watched his machine vanish into the quickly disintegrating structure, he assisted his mother in escaping. A half block from the building, PAM reappeared as swiftly as it had vanished, holding tenants in its arms before dropping them off with the rest in a group. Then he heard concrete crumble and metal shatter. People and PAM were still inside the structure when it collapsed. While the battle raged nearby, many people watched and some sobbed. As the dust dispersed, Izuku approached and put a palm over his face. The structure was in ruins, with glass and metal strewn all over it. Then he heard a faint whine of metal. Before he saw a dad clutching his daughter being pushed out by PAM's robotic limb, a piece of rubble moved. Izuku sprinted towards them, allowing the father to crawl away as he peered down the hole from which they had been forced. Beneath the concrete, he discovered PAM, the wretched little machine, partially crushed, hydraulic fluid and oil seeping from his broken shape. As Izuku gazed down the hole at his broken tiny robot, he was genuinely saddened. Then, PAM made a movement. A youngster being lifted from the pit. Before giving the youngster to one of the other tenants who had followed him, Izuku grabbed him from PAM. Before it beeped, PAM released two more persons. With regret, Izuku said, "Please don't." Before it shut down, he saw PAM give a thumbs up with one of its working limbs and emit another little beep. Izuku watched as an explosion from the surrounding battle struck close to the debris, causing the building to tremble. As the others ran, he sensed a change. Looking back as the ruins slumped down even further before a fireball impacted the rubble, Izuku leapt away. Izuku gazed down at the little box before him. They were only able to salvage this from the apartment's debris. Some of his recent notebooks and a few hard drives. Along with the remnants of PAM. His mother was devastated by the sacrifice made by PAM and the destruction of their home. But all he felt was emptiness. Everything that was destroyed, all that loss. Before it ended, that conflict between the hero and the villain demolished at least 3 additional residential complexes. How many of those other people had perished as a result of a hero's careless actions? None of them had PAM to assist them. A brief newspaper item titled, "Solar Flare Defeats Villain Inferno," was the only result of the battle. No mention of the human casualties or the demolished apartments. There are no words to express how angry he was at the seeming indifference these heroes showed to the average person. He took one more glance down at PAM's remains. Then he had a thought. "Attention all units, we have a robbery in progress. A group of 4 armored assailants are currently armed and dangerous." They tore open an armored van and fled with both the cash and the remains of the vehicle. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief. The current heist scheme is displayed on a computer screen in front of him. A real-world demonstration of his most recent inventions, the Beta-Run Combat Droids, or BRCD for short, or bricks. With a tread-tire mix for rapid movement on any terrain, 2 movable arms with integrated weapon parts, and basic command relays integrated into the torso with a fake head to deflect attention, the typical brick model was a very huge beast. The bricks' performance was sufficient. While his other droids stealthily gathered the loot piece by piece, the bricks led the police on a wild goose chase, proving that all the simulated test runs were working as planned. A maintenance droid drove past to watch the screen, and he turned his focus to the faint chirps of machinery behind him. Izuku addressed the little machine, saying, "That's right R7, the boys are doing it." To help him create larger and more intricate droids for his goals, he had first constructed the maintenance droids. He had plenty of spare time ever since his mother drowned in work to pay off the debt required to purchase a new home. He had plenty of time to plot his revenge and construct a number of new machines, including a PAM Jr., to help him in his schemes. He could finally test his creations against the hero's guile now that his brick models were out on theft. The 4 crooks stole the money and the components of the car, and MT. Lady was unable to catch up. The components of the armored transport left her scratching her brain, but she could understand the money. Now that she had stopped them, she didn't have time to examine it. She leapt into the air and kicked the baddies flat with her legs, only for them to pivot precisely at the same moment and avoid her onslaught. As she fell through the streets below, she groaned in agony as her costume was sliced by the jagged pavement. While pursuing the culprits, she witnessed additional heroes leap past her. Izuku sighed as he shifted the screen's perspective. He posted the most recent modifications to their itinerary, which took them to their hiding place by way of the subway and the sewers. He wasn't in the mood to take a big chance with so many heroes, and more were joining the hunt. Even with the assistance of his maintenance droids, he had taken 3 months to create the 4 brick models. He didn't want to lose one of them and already have it linked to him. While the front unit prepared their right weapons, he ordered the rear units to prepare their left weapons. Kamui Woods pursued the thieves, swinging across the city. The police were not far behind him, and they were slowing down. He yelled, "Hold it right there," as he got ready to use his most effective binding method. With the front 2 raising their right arms and the back 2 rising their left, the crooks appeared to be ignoring him. Something passed through him as his lacquered cross-chain prison erupted. His knees buckled, his body locked up, and he swore that he felt his heart leap into his throat. The sound of halted cars rang in his ears as he collapsed onto his back, his whole body limp. The cops in the cars buckled like him, and he could only stare with his eyes straining as all the cars appeared to freeze and break in place. Then he detected a slight buzzing sound. His body felt like it had been struck by 1,000 tasers, and it still wouldn't move. The buzzing got louder, and stones started to soar out of his line of sight. He had no idea how long this would go on, so all he could do was pray someone else received them. The mass shock gauntlets performed as planned, and Izuku grinned. Even Kamui Woods, who was usually resistant to shock, was vulnerable to them at medium range. The cherry on top was the fact that they stopped an entire convoy of police cars in their tracks. They were able to sneak away into the underground labyrinth of subway rails and sewer tunnels after making a rapid cut through the road with their heavy saws. These days, even the greatest heroes would have a hard time finding them. To verify that he had arrived at the setup point successfully, his screen beeped. All they needed to do now was defuse the paint bombs within the bags and conceal the tracker in a hard-to-find location. As he read the news of today's heist, Aizawa sighed. After ambushing an armored van and tearing it to bits while leaving the policemen unharmed, 4 armored crooks fled with the money and the van itself. It was illogical from a logical standpoint. If someone was intending to steal the van, why in the world would they destroy it? Unfortunately, Aizawa didn't make enough money to consider what it is at the moment. Inside the underground's twisting passages, the police had provided him with the van's last known coordinates. They believed that since he was the most important underground hero, it was his responsibility to get it back. With a sigh, he entered a spacious, open space. The van's license plate and the tracking device were resting in the middle. He took a tentative step forward while looking around the room. There was nowhere for them to hide from him because the room was too wide open. He walked over to the pile and leaned down. The paint bombs from inside the duffel bags were located just beneath the tracker, ready to detonate if disturbed. Aizawa swiftly phoned a number after taking out his phone. "Hello, yes, I found the tracker. The villains are smarter than they look, managed to rig the paint bombs underneath the tracker and license plate. Not a single one has been detonated yet." Aizawa was quiet. "You can track my cell from the station. The tracker won't be moving, but there's no evidence of the villains even being here other than the setup." He went on. Prior to the other end clicking, Aizawa said, "I'll hold the place down until you can send a squad down here." With a groan, he leaned against the wall next to him and took out a packet of jelly. He sighed in frustration and inserted the straw. Before focusing on the actual reward, Izuku calculated the money from the heist, roughly 7 billion yen, to be exact. The van with armor. He already had ideas about what he could make out of the van's contents. What improvements he could make to the brick models, what new creations he could develop. In order to provide him with the most inventory pieces feasible, B2 through B9 were already hard at work disassembling the vehicle. Bricks C and D were being examined by B1 and B10 to look for any adverse impacts from the use of the mass shock gauntlets. As Brick A and B got to work moving the cash into crates for future usage and trading, he simply grinned. "All right, Bricks, once you are finished with inspection, hide in the lower level and initiate sleep mode. B1, B10, I want a record of Brick C and Brick D's conditions following your inspection." B2 through B9, enter safe mode once you're done with the van pieces. Izuku said as he got up. He started for the door. He turned back and gazed proudly at his works, grinning softly. After their successful first theft, he felt like a parent watching their child play their part in the play without any problems. Before leaving the building, he closed the door behind him and told his machines, "Okay, I'm locking up, try to be in save mode within the hour." There was nothing noteworthy about the trek home. Before he found their present residence, he slunk past the homeless and drug addicts who were known to plague the surrounding streets. It was a modest, one-story home with limited space. He took his keys out and opened the door. Izuku sighed when Pam Jr. stepped through, showed up and grabbed his jacket. As he walked to his bed, Izuku muttered, "Well, it was a nice Saturday. I hope Mom is okay." Despite its small size, it provided him with plenty room for his necessities. He had a little PC and his notebooks. His bed occupied about half the room, and he lay close to a nightstand. Pam Jr. Izuku simply stared at the ceiling while he whistled kindly at him. Izuku whispered to the little robot, "OJNR. Today is the start of many things. Many things." The robot then grinned. Izuku went back to the warehouse and fixed the collar of his shirt. For the majority of the morning, his phone has been ringing with diagnostic reports from the maintenance droids. It seems that before he could deploy the mass shock gauntlets on their next heist, a few minor problems would need to be fixed. As he entered, the several machines in power-saving mode welcomed him. The issue had been identified by removing and opening each of the brick units' left arms. Important circuitry and pieces of wiring were melting. Izuku knelt down to examine the weapon and mumbled, "So, I can't use copper for this." As the maintenance droids switched back on and resumed their tasks, he whistled. Izuku took some of his supplies from the theft and a toolbox nearby. As he examined the damage to the rubber covering on the wires, he mumbled, "I'm going to need something more heat-resistant than rubber, maybe even a new type of polymer." As he started applying a rubberized paste to fix the melted sections, he remarked, "Looks like we'll have to get by with a lower setting until I can get the necessary materials." Nedzu scowls as he reads the robbery report from yesterday. The cops provided him a copy because they couldn't figure it out and wanted to see if he could offer any useful advice. He went over the report again. An armored van carrying money between banks was assaulted by 4 armored individuals. Before stealing the money and the van itself, they used their own hands to tear it apart. As they avoided pursuing heroes, they showed a remarkable synchrony with each other. They then used an electric weapon that stunned everyone in the area and shorted out the cars when it seemed like the heroes had encircled them. Subsequently, they crossed the road and vanished into the sewers, only for the purpose of tracking them down and destroying the money that was left in one room. This case had a lot of potential outcomes. A well-funded criminal organization made consisting of only strength quirk users. Using some hired goons, a madman tests his gear to see whether it could sell to the underworld. Even if they had access to strong technology, a group of electric quirk users could overcome their shortcomings. The existence of a mastermind in the background was a commonality among these beliefs. As he started to come up with responses to this insane man, Nedzu had to force himself not to smile. Izuku fumbled with B10 and sighed. He had more than enough help for his next assignment between the B and R models. The metal from the van was being reshaped by the droids into a frame for his most recent invention. Issue, or ISSU for short, stands for the Infiltration, Stealth, and Sabotage Unit. Although his names were still being developed, his goal for Issue MK1 was rather clear. Japan is home to hundreds of jewelry stores, all of which are brimming with gold and diamonds, items he will require for next builds. He was already looking for some of the materials he would need on the dark web and at regular online stores. Not to mention that the heroes were presently searching for the brick units. He might as well startle them. The design is already in his head. While the R units prepared the internal circuitry, the B units were busy crushing the metal into round forms. Regretfully, he had to use B10 as the Issue MK1 base, but he forced himself to suppress his sadness at having to disassemble his invention. As the B units gradually handed him the freshly fitted bits of metal, the R units handed him the wiring and CPUs. The new machine was gradually put together and prepared for its first mission. There weren't many heroes patrolling the region at the moment, and the night was quiet. Izuku continued to stare at the screen. Even though it was night, he could see the street's layout clearly. The target was directly beneath Issue MK1. The droid's enhanced limbs allowed it to drill all the way into the ground floor, and its integrated electric dampener stopped the sirens from going off. As Issue's arms reached out and took everything, the display cases were powerless. They stole steel and silver and stole jewels and gold. The floor was cleared of valuables in a short period of time. As it escaped, Issue sank back into the hole from where it had emerged, strategically collapsing the tunnel with its arms. He then ordered it to proceed to the following store. Then the subsequent one. Since Issue grabbed everything, one store was exactly as powerless as the last. Then something went wrong. The direct stream revealed that he wasn't the only thief tonight, and Izuku had to suppress a groan. Two mooks with crowbars and ski masks stood motionless as they gazed down at the droid before them. Izuku simply shook his head before giving Issue another command. The deep voice of the synthetic speaker echoed, "Give up the goods, or lose your limbs." By threateningly spreading its arms forth, Issue highlighted its point. The mooks disregarded the order, with one charging Issuer with his crowbar and the other charging with a quirk of some sort. Issue seized the first mook and twisted his wrists while Izuku shook his head. Issue raised the mook above its body and hurled the crowbar toward the other mook, causing it to fall on the ground. His buddy slammed the second mook with full force, cutting off his attack. Issue rushed in and hit Mook 1 with one of its bigger arms, giving them little chance. His jaw was resting strangely as he sagged down. With Issue hovering above him, Mook 2 attempted to pull himself out. Issue hit the back of his neck before he could get an opportunity. Before it fled back into the tunnel, it grabbed the bag that the robbers had and carried on with the heist. As it escaped, it followed its ritual of collapsing the holes behind it. Looking down at the office's quarters, the commissioner said calmly, 13 stores were struck in a single night. And all we have to show for it is damaged property and 2 critically injured wannabe jewel thieves. We haven't gotten a word from the 2 of them, but all we can gather is that the robberies were all performed by the same individual. Every building was broken into by drilling through the floor. At a certain time before his entry the power will fail and the alarms will be disabled. Then they escape with everything and by the time the alarm sounds they are long gone. The commissioner speculated. Some believe they may be connected to the group who struck the armored van the prior day. However, the jewel thief struck 3 prefecture away from the area where the group has struck. So current hypothesis says that someone is supplying new criminals with experimental technology and making groundbreaking progress with it all. The commissioner let out a sigh, while he surveyed the room's police. As the cops nodded and got to their feet, the commissioner declared, any technology recovered from the scenes will be sent to I-Island to help us in understanding just what we're up against. Now, dismissed. Izuku examined the neatly arranged heaps of gems, silver, and gold. While Izuku wondered what to do with the silver and diamonds, the R units were already upgrading the brick unit's mass shock gauntlets with the gold. He took out a notebook and started writing down our suggestions for what to do. Issue MK1 was being repaired and cleaned by the B units. That's when he got an idea. Taking one of the lesser gems, he examined it carefully. Izuku grinned as he started sketching the blueprints for his newest weapon. Izuku repositioned his freshly crafted eyeglasses. There are multiple types of magnification possible with the fitted diamond lens. Izuku glanced down at the little frame he was working on while B and R units worked diligently to put the recently updated mass shock gauntlets onto the brick models. So far, he had only been in charge of a jewelry store once a week. Issue was a blessing for him to keep working, and he wouldn't have to worry about his mother asking him about his finances anytime soon. Soon, he had an exhibition to attend. One in which his mother wouldn't have to worry about their finances if he were to successfully sell his PAM model. He only needs to be successful so that he may have a respectable business and pay the bills. That's for later, though. He needed to design and test a laser for the time being. Nedzu scratched at his own head. He was only given information on the aftermath of the robberies. No signs of large machinery. The tunnel collapsed, making any attempt to follow it useless. Millions of dollars worth of gold and jewels were taken in a century-long theft that was impossible to trace. At the moment, the police were attempting to track the remnants of the tunnels using seismographs and sonar radars. The media was already trying to label this unidentified figure. They were calling it the Mole Man. After a moment of wrinkled brow, he shook his head. Before going back through his notes, he bemoaned the obsession with such foolish names. As he heard the news, All for One smiled. The underworld now has a new player. His apprentice's League of Villains would be very grateful for someone with such equipment. Someone with technology that could compete with Island would be absolutely invaluable, as he already had the lead in quirk research at his disposal. He just needed to arrange a meeting, determine which jewelry retailer will be the target of the next attack and entrench the criminal in their company. Kurogiri, I want you to pull up a map of all the jewelry store hit by the mole man. A foe said to his waiter. Kurogiri took out a tablet and handed it to him, saying, Of course, sir. A foe navigated through the data using a variety of technopathic peculiarities. They struck 13 stores in one prefecture on the first night, and then one store in 2 prefectures the next week. From there, they would target another prefecture that was inside the original 13 heists 2 prefecture radius. Kurogiri nodded and looked down at the tablet as a foe told him, there's 3 options for their next heist. Kurogiri, I want you to send some fodder to watch over these areas for the following week and a half. Tell them to keep us up to date by the minute. Undertsuf, sir. Also, I must inform you that young Tamura has begun looking into potential members for the league. Kurogiri replied to his superior. A foe sank back in his chair and said, Good to hear, I have another member we could add to the list. Whoever is behind these heists will be a fine addition to my collection of aides. Kurogiri teleported out of the room after nodding. As he weighed all the options, a foe whispered, Now Moleman, or whatever you truly are, you will be mine. A sliver of doubt grew in Izuku's throat, which he had to swallow. He has a number of PAM models on a flat rolling cart. He walked by kiosks and booths occupied by other innovators and their creations. While some of the others would examine the PAMs in the cart, he would continuously check over his shoulder. The sole barrier between the PAMs and any robbers is the tarp. When he reached the queue, he started to wait while the investors gradually assessed each individual in front of him. There wasn't much he could do to move the queue forward, but he had the entire day to do this. While some of them started to scream in exasperation, he could hear others celebrating. At last, it was his turn. He pulled in his cart of PAM models and took off the tarp, drawing attention from the line of investors. One of the judges said, Please state your name and your invention. Izuku turned on the first PAM model and said, My name is Midoriya Izuku and my invention is known as the PAM or Personal Assault Machine. As the other PAMs were turned on, Izuku went on, The PAM is an all-in-one servant to help around the household. It can be programmed to serve for over 500 different jobs around the house. The PAM is a rather practical machine. As the PAMs started to move around the set and carry out various tasks, Izuku calmly explained, The PAM is all-terrain thanks to both the treads and its lower set of arms. Each arm is powered by hydraulics and is rather easy to repair. PAMs are also capable of working together thanks to their ally program. Another PAM unit was even raised above its head by one of the PAMs. As the PAMs queued up, Izuku guessed, with the PAM labor will be revolutionized. He questioned the investors, Is there any specific action you would like to see the PAMs perform? As they removed a life-sized mannequin from close to their table, one of the investors inquired, Yes, can one of them perform a Heimlich maneuver? Izuku stated the command while facing PAM 1. After driving to the investor and accepting the offered mannequin, PAM 1 performed a Heimlich on it. As each investor requested a PAM model to complete a distinct assignment, the investors started chatting among themselves. Young Midoriya, after much debate we have decided we are willing to invest in the distribution of these PAMs. We simply required a signature and a note from their inventor. One of them replied, Izuku inquired, as the paper already present. After giving Izuku a nod, one of the judges handed him a piece of paper. Izuku studied the article and nodded. He only needs to sign one document to assist his mother, perhaps he will be able to stop the unlawful activity. Before giving the document back to the investors, he signed it with a pen he took out of his jeans pocket. They appeared taken aback by his behavior. One of them questioned, You're the inventor? Before they all turned to one of them, Izuku responded, Yes, machinery has always been a passion of mine and programming is only hard when you don't have any idea what you want to do. The others turned back to him, and she nodded. Izuku nodded in agreement as they said, Well, young Midoriya, it seems we have an excellent young mind in our presence. One of them said, Now, can we please have our next one up? As the PAMs all went back to the cart, Izuku nodded. As the next inventor took the stage, he grinned and pulled the contraption away on the cart. As she began to babble about the babies she had made, he held back a shudder. With a sigh of relief, He glanced down at his ID and walked more quickly, and grinned. He might have at last discovered some folks who weren't fixated with heroism because they never inquired about his quirk. He only needed to begin selling now. Using a group of his shell firms, Yatsubasi watched the feed from one of the newest tech ventures. Numerous youthful brains and innovative ideas that could benefit the globe were there. The Meta Liberation Army might benefit from a lot of things. One item, though, caused him to halt. A youthful brain in one special situation. A quirkless boy with some really good-looking equipment. Since quirks naturally spread throughout the declining quirkless gene pool, he now genuinely believed that the quirkless had vanished. This young man, however, was a natural holdover from the past who was moving forward. He reviewed the boy's data and remarked, "Such a young mind, one that can be shaped." The concept made him laugh. Through talent and skill alone, a member of the minority rises to the level of the majority. As he ended the video, he moaned, "Ah, if only I could bring such a mind into the fold." Still, he got some ideas from simply observing what those PAMs were capable of. As the machine hummed, Inko came home, removing her shoes and reclining in the chair while moaning in agony. PAM. Junior rolled up next to her and picked up a pair of tiny pillows, and she said, "Thank you." Izuku remarked, "Mom," as he walked up to her. "Oh Izu, shouldn't you be in bed, dear?" "Mom, they approved it," she said to him. "I am now able to sell PAMs to others." Izuku put his arms around her and said, "We'll make more money." She hugged him back and whispered, "Oh, Izu." Nedzu hummed as he put together his most recent set of documents. He may be a hero, but he was also a principal, and managing UA is more difficult than facing any villain apart from a foe. On top of that, he has to constantly order new supplies, destroy and repair the gyms every day, and keep some of his staff members' spending habits under wraps. The 4 armored robbers had not been reported, the mole man had not struck in nearly 2 months, and his favorite case had gone cold. Nothing. Dead silence. It was hard to understand. A successful criminal doesn't simply vanish, there's no question that he's planning something. As he adjusted the inner workings of the lasers, barrel, and calibrated the lens of his laser weapon, which he had set up on a tripod, Izuku hummed as he walked away from it, grabbed a pair of welding goggles, put them over his eyes, and held up a small remote control. Attempt number 5, let's see how long it will take to cut through a sheet of reinforced steel. Izuku muttered as he pressed a button on the remote control. Before a beam of blue energy fired, the laser made a faint hum. The glow from the laser was much brighter than the lights, and as the beam slowly sliced through the sheet of metal in its path, it started to bubble. Izuku pressed the button again when the beam was halfway through. The metal surrounding the cut was still glowing bright red from the intense heat of the laser, so he pulled out a pair of welding gloves and put them on. He grinned as he measured the width and depth of the cut, muttering, "Almost there, just need to increase the magnification and adjust the power output." He then left, removed the welding gloves, and wrote the information in a small notepad. As he opened the side latch once more, he thought, once the laser cutters are finished, I'll have a more advanced substitute for the saw arms. But, it's still best to have some of the saws around, as the lasers will always be a little delicate. Before feeling something brush against his leg, he made the required changes, and as he turned around, he saw one of the R units attempting to get his attention. "What is it?" He stood up and inquired. The R unit hurried back, and Izuku trailed behind it. Izuku felt his blood run cold as he watched a small group of heroes approach from just up the block, and he swiftly took out his phone and entered in a command. The droid rushed up the stairs, checking to see if he could keep up, before stopping at one of the slightly open windows. Issue MK1 went straight to the wall before changing its shape to resemble some sort of container. The R unit ran back down the stairs and gathered with the others. He had quickly installed a false floor that covered the brick units in the laser project. The R and B units lined up and entered power save mode while assuming the shape of a large machine. One of his spare PAM units turned on and drove to his side, leaving only Izuku with a modest workshop setup that would not appear unusual for someone of his hobby. The decoy mode was activated. There would be no criminal activity or malice here, just a young man building innocuous machinery if the heroes broke in. Of course, the disguise would be pointless if the heroes simply decided to destroy the premises, but at least he wouldn't be exposed right away. Izuku inhaled and exhaled slowly, regulating his breathing to give the impression that he was not a criminal in disguise, and he took extra care to conceal the crucial notebook with the brick models beneath his feet, so that all they would discover on his person were the basic blueprints for his future legal designs. A small group of villains had apparently chosen one of the warehouses away from his own as a safe house, so he decided to go to the main door and look through the window, despite his better judgment, after hearing a slight scuffle outside. "Not so safe anymore, huh?" he asked, observing the growing devastation that occurred as a result of the battle. When the police eventually showed up and hauled the crooks away, Izuku sighed and stopped looking as he saw the heroes begin to investigate the other nearby warehouses. The heroes were decisively superior to the villains and were swiftly beaten into submission. Izuku shook his head, took a moment to return to the workshop area, put earplugs in his ears, and began working on the frame of one of the legal projects. "This will take all day, I can't risk it," he mumbled aloud as he watched the heroes spread out even more. The PAM unit followed him, using its arms to help hold the beta frame and adjust it for inspection. If a hero did break in, he had plausible deniability because he had investors supporting his project. This warehouse had long since been abandoned by any company, and he would not have heard the fighting thanks to his earplugs. Nedzu watched as Powerloader seemed to be ecstatic about this new machine that was being sold all over Japan. Powerloader had bought the Personal Assistant Machine, or PAM for short, with some of the school's money as well as his own, and he had approved the use of school funds for this purchase because he was interested in this new project. These unusual machines, which had a strictly utilitarian design, nothing flashy, just purpose, had been purchased by many of Japan's elite and some of the more understaffed public servant fields, i.e., hospitals and construction. He wanted to know who had built such a machine, and it was a huge benefit that it was there solely to help people with their lives, but he could do without having to listen to Powerloader rave about it with a ferocity that was typically reserved for extreme smut. "Would you please just go right to the point?" As the PAM gave a little chirp, Powerloader responded, "Oh, well, rumor has it that a bright young mind was the one who created these little droids." "Well, which school is this young mind from?" he questioned his staff member in a frantic attempt to shift the topic. "Nobody knows. The leading theory is that he isn't going to any of the major schools," Powerloader said in response to Nedzu's question. "Really?" Powerloader pulled out his phone and began looking up information on it, adding, "In fact, there are a couple videos circulating on the web over the young man's presentation to some investors. Still, someone like that not attending school is quite worrying." Nedzu thought about what he had said, and Powerloading simply shrugged. Powerloader said, "Well, we might meet him then, as our entry examinations are in just 1 month. Perhaps they did catch his name?" Nedzu inquired. "Nope, his face is obscured, and they have removed the sound of his name, along with the vocal alteration and blur." As he played the footage for Nedzu, Powerloader retorted, "They made sure no one knows who is who." Nedzu watched the screen as the young man arrived, his name cut from the audio, and the PAM units were activated. They drove around. Then the investors began asking them to perform specific tasks, and Nedzu grinned as the PAMs completed each task flawlessly. "Powerloader, I think I can recognize the young man. I'll write to UA as soon as I locate him." Nedzu gave Powerloader his phone back and started to leave as he continued to examine the PAM model. "Oh, I may also order 3 more of these PAMs while I'm at it," Nedzu added, to see if he's interested in joining. To confirm what he was reading, Izuku looked at his phone and saw that a man with ties to the investors wanted to meet with him. They even provided him with a time and place if he agreed, and the man in question was reportedly the leader of a significant Zaibatsu. As he pondered his next course of action, he put his phone back. He was already in the process of applying to an online school, and the sale of his PAMs was gradually increasing the family's funds. At this point, all he really needed was a more efficient way to make PAMs quickly, as they were selling much more quickly than he had anticipated. When the train came to a stop, he and many of the other passengers filed out. When he finally arrived at the meeting, which was just a block away, he discovered a man seated at a private table at one of the fancier restaurants. The staff, who had probably been informed about the meeting beforehand, led him to the man. "Come, young Midoriya," Izuku said, glancing at Yatsubashi, the head of Dineret and its subsidiaries, who had his fingers in the pockets of numerous media and support companies. As Izuku spoke, he remarked, "I just want to chat." "What do you want to talk about?" Izuku inquired warily. "Well, the main thing that interests me is what motivated you to develop the PAM units in the first place." Yatsubashi agreed, and Izuku responded, "Okay, it's a bit of a long story, so you may want to relax. I myself have purchased one, but I want to know what led to their creation, he continued. My dad had to work in the United States, so he left the country when I was 3 years old. Even though I occasionally spoke with him on the phone, I didn't really know him. My mother, who is a good person, reared me by herself. She had to raise and care for me while juggling her own job. Izuku hesitated as Yatsubashi looked at him. As I got older, I started studying history and became fascinated by the technologies of the past. What does the technology of the past mean? He inquired. Humanity had nearly revolutionized space flight, based on the rare survivor documents from pre-Quark times and pre-World War III. If all those resources hadn't been diverted by the onset of World War III, a moon colony might have existed in a few more years. Things like the PAM or those robots at UA are examples of what we missed between the war and the complete social upheaval brought on by Quarks. Seem like kids' toys. Yatsubashi nodded, and Izuku hesitated once more. So, using my knowledge base and unadulterated determination, I created something to honor my mother for everything she has done for me. Izuku concluded, I must say, your mother must be quite proud of you. Yatsubashi responded, that she is. So the PAM was born, and improving life with each modification. Izuku agreed. While Izuku scowled, Yatsubashi remarked, well, I must say that I never expected you to be so open. I see no reason to hide why I made the PAMs, their nature makes it obvious. Still, to do all this, with a quirk of your own is truly remarkable. More of this quirk obsession nonsense. Izuku remarked. I'm just saying, now. Very few people gave you a chance. The reality is that you might have been turned down by one of those investors if you hadn't had a truth quirk. I would like to know your personal opinion on quirks. Yatsubashi murmured, holding up a hand, and Izuku gave him a direct look before inhaling deeply. Well, my thoughts about quirks. I never fully understood the significance of it. They appear to defy natural science and are a component of the body. The antagonists illustrate what occurs when they aren't controlled, and the hero's system exalts them. As Yatsubashi leaned forward, Izuku leaned back in his chair and stated, the problem is that they are both out of date by about 200 years. Society has become so fixated on them that they are treated more like a strange anomaly than the typical thing that they are. Considering all of the bizarre eugenics that have emerged in reaction to quirks, I have never found the appeal of some quirks. Even though I've suffered a lot as a result of that society's fixation with quirks, I don't despise them, I simply don't think it's being handled well. Izuku stopped and took a deep breath. It is never a good thing to use laws for a time of chaos at a time of peace. He noticed that Yatsubashi was grinning when he looked up. Interesting, so that's how you view quirks. It's an observation, he said. Izuku said plainly, times must change. The harm caused by the excessive obsession with quirks must be repaired before the entire system collapses. Yatsubashi nodded. I see. I appreciate this discussion. Are you going to stay for the dinner? Izuku remarked. Sorry, I have to go. I enjoyed our talk, as he got up and walked away when Yatsubashi inquired. Are we supposed to follow him? No, don't bother him, a voice crackled in Yatsubashi's earpiece. As his dinner arrived, Yatsubashi responded, he's already connected to one of our subsidiaries. Ah, such insight that can only be found from an outside perspective, he thought. You did record his words, correct? Yes, sir, I believe he could be a recruit, he said to the earpiece. Given the young man's apparent intelligence, could he be concealing a meta ability? No, the boy's files state that they carried out every test conceivable to ascertain whether or not he has a quirk, the voice inquired. He said, what the boy is a philosopher looking at our society from an outside view. Understood, but read Destro, some of the others may target him, the voice replied. Yes, I am aware. The boy has an obsession with a pre-meta abilities era. However, not for our demise, but for our good. He views meta abilities as just another aspect of life, not something to be hated. Not some insane weapon that needs to be controlled, but something that people own. Yatsubashi remarked, the youngster would be a great fit with the MLA's moderates. Would he ever join? I doubt it, but I do want to see how he can advance on his own, the voice inquired. Keep him well funded, and I'll be closely following his career, Yatsubashi remarked. All that talk about quirks, why does everyone have to go to quirks? Izuku sighed as he made his way back to the warehouse after his nerves were rattled by his conversation with the CEO of Dynamo yesterday. As he opened the door and entered, he moaned. Let's simply do I need something to distract me from it, he muttered as he surveyed the workshop. After he took out his phone, the brick models and their weapon arms appeared from a concealed floor. The B&R units disassembled and formed a line in preparation for his next order, and the issue Mk1 approached and stood ready. He glanced around the room, admiring his handiwork, and then it struck him, where should he hit next? He examined the collected droids, a thought slowly taking shape, and he smiled because he knew exactly where to hit next. Izuku combed through his laptop's numerous emails. Orders were documented, spam was removed, and other emails were put on hold for later. Then his attention was drawn to something. UA sent an email. High school. He suppressed a sigh. He opened the email and grumbled, more hero business nonsense. Hello young Midoriya Izuku, this is Principal Nedzu of UA Hero Academy. One of my staff members showed me a video of your demonstration to a collection of investors and it piqued my interests. I believe our support course would greatly benefit from a mind such as yours entering the school. Izuku stopped and grumbled as he read the email. Our school is well funded and boasts a zero tolerance of bullying and discrimination. I feel that UA would be a great fit for such a bright young mind such as yourself. Signed Principal Nedzu, Izuku said with a sigh. He was aware that this might occur. Hero schools must hire geniuses as soon as they are discovered and put to work. Izuku dismissed the email with a grimace. No matter what they tried to do, he was not going to work for them. Glancing over the latest news, All for One frowned. The day he sent the scouts out to find him, the mole man had gone utterly missing. Even though he had scouts visiting every jewelry store in a 4-prefecture radius, no one had been hit since. It seemed as though he vanished after realizing he wanted him. He slowed his breathing for All for One. Then another tablet was called forth. He started looking over the available data and making connections. A series of surveillance feeds that followed the 4-man heist that took place before the mole man's initial attack started to play in his head. After pausing it, he played back the sequence in which Kamui Woods and the police were attacked by two of them brandishing some kind of electric weapon. He then made a connection to the footage captured by the cameras in each of the damaged jewelry stores. They all began normally, then gradually went static, turned off for a while, and then restarted less than a minute later, with the shop in ruins. The identical scene was played on every single camera in every single store. He repeatedly played back each scene. Then it hit him. Rather than being quirk-based, the interference was technology-based. He's lived long enough to understand the distinction. So, the mole man is indeed connected to the 4 brutes. A foe said, digging as a means of escape, strong electric weapons, and nearly mechanical movements for every step. All of the evidence pointed to a bright intellect with a knack for robotics. He traversed the internet, looking at web pages and articles about possible mates. Too old, much too crazy. I already have him working for me. That person is a hero. Those are feet. They are not hands. He's deceased. It is a hero commission rat. Quirkless, fearful and naive. Wait, he said, pausing his thought as he turned around. On the boys' computers, he played the video again. He then contrasted that with a live video feed of the 4 at work. Before he resumed his browsing, he said, far too different. A close match but far too varied. Another hero. Much too morally reprehensible to commit simple robberies. That's a trenchcoat-wearing chimpanzee. Izuku sighed as he examined his just-completed device. With 2 main arms and a set of detachable secondary arms, the droid was taller than any of the brick models. It was supported by 4 large hydraulic legs instead of treads. It featured a large torso but no fake head. This was known as Head Mk1, or Heavily Armed Combat Droid HACD. 8 brick models, poised for action, stood behind it. While some of his newly created tools were used by the others, half of them were equipped with the identical tools from their prior theft. A tiny army of R&B models stood at their sides, ready to receive any order, while a group of 4 issue Mk1s stood in front of them. Izuku approached the computer and entered a series of commands. Izuku smiled darkly as the droids glowed and saluted him. As the droids were dropped into the tunnels, he stated, "Gentlemen, your next mission starts now." This is the Daily News reporting live as a group of heavily armed villains are raiding the Dynamo support company. They have an unknown number of hostages but are described as armed and dangerous. The heroes and police outside are stuck waiting on the villains' demands, hesitant due to the concern for the people inside. The reporter was extremely worried. Izuku forced himself not to roll his eyes. While the others started dismantling everything, he had 2 of his brick units gather the workers into the building's only secure chamber. To avoid raising suspicions, a number of his R&B units had accompanied him, affixed to the sides of the bricks and head units. None of them were aware that issues were also present, excavating a tunnel of escape with care as the R&Bs stole everything that might be traced. 1 brick unit guarded the main entrance, while Head held watch at the other entrance. Before anyone could take action, he would have the entire place cleared out. Oh, but a new hero has arrived on the scene. It's All Might. I thought he was going to be teaching at UA, but he's here now. The reporter said. Izuku furrowed his brow before rapidly typing in a number of commands. He wiped the perspiration off his forehead carefully before looking at his several monitors. He was a simple man, Togashi. He put in a lot of overtime to provide for his family, read manga in his spare time, and tried to help raise his kids whenever he could. His life was quite typical. A bunch of heavily armed criminals then broke in barely 30 minutes from the company lunch break, defeated any security that tried to thwart their advances, and herded up everyone else into the spacious break room. They assured them that they would not be hurt if they stayed inside. Even a platter of finger food was provided for them by the crooks. He was aware that they would be stranded there for a considerable amount of time. He has little possibility of completing the project by Saturday. Then one of the villains came in as the door opened. It grabbed me by the collar and pulled me out without saying anything. With a harsh voice, the other villain warned the other employees in the room, "Do not leave this room. Failure to comply will result in usage of the MSG." Nobody would want to be on the receiving end of MSG because it sounded like a gun. He was taken along the corridors by the evil. Craning his neck around, he tried to see what else was going on. The front entrance and all of the media and heroes on the other side were then visible to him. The villain handed him off to their leader, a frightful figure who was completely clad in metal armor. After grabbing him by the collar, the boss made his way to the door. The police and heroes yelled at the villain to release him. Togashi felt the villain's big metal hand encircle his torso, but the villain disregarded them. Through a speaker, the boss said in a deep, menacing voice, "Do not try to interfere. Interference will only result in the harming of workers. We have the means to kill everyone in this building if compliance isn't met." Mid-startup, even All Might paused. The villain continued, "Know that they will be unharmed if you remain where you are." All Might appeared to clench his jaw. As Togashi felt tears streaming down his cheeks, the villain added, "Do not think that I am bluffing. Let me show you." Since his children were in school, they might not have witnessed the scenario, but his wife was likely crying at the moment. Before he could hear a little humming, the villain's other arm straightened out. Shutting his eyes, Togashi prepared for the worst. He heard panic and shouting, but nothing materialized. He had the impression that he was being transferred back to the other villain, that he was moving. When Togashi opened his eyes, the entire street to his right was dark. Not a single car was moving, and not a single light was on. All the men, whether they were reporters, police officers, or heroes, were lying on the ground in agony. As Togashi and the others were escorted back, the boss remarked, "Remember that it can be worse." To anybody who would listen, he hoped that he and everyone else would survive this ordeal. Izuki gave a headshake. The purpose of this order was to expressly oppose All Might. He might never build a machine that could match the number one hero's power, but he knew just how to defeat him. One of the rare heroes, All Might, didn't have the audacity to rush in when the evil threatened in this way. All Might wasn't foolish, even though he might be. Show them that the hostages are safe, assure them that they won't be hurt if they don't try anything, and demonstrate what they can do if they believe we're bluffing. According to his current calculation, the maximum power of the mass shock gauntlet might roast someone's insides from a distance of 20 meters. On a lesser setting, it would be nearly impossible to wipe out an entire street. According to his estimates now, not even All Might could slow down the gauntlet's weapons pace. In any case, this gained him an additional hour or so. The R&Bs had nearly finished dismantling the entire establishment. The issue's escape tunnel would soon let them to all go, and Izuku would have more technology at his disposal for his illicit activities. Few other businesses had the tools he now needed for his next endeavor, therefore he resented having to purchase this tech from a hero support company. He had to suppress his anger and channel it toward his needs. All Might clenched his jaw. Nothing was occurring, and he was nearly at the end of his time. Just to his left, a group of police officers and heroes were shown what the villains would do after threatening the workers. The paramedics continued to treat patients impacted by the villain's enigmatic weapon. He had to bite back his anger and grit his teeth. Every now and then, he would imagine what that weapon would do to the building's employees if he made a snap decision. The pictures remind me of the agonizing experience of facing that monster. Then something took place. The hostages started moving in a single file line toward the entryway. They were all marching quickly, with their hands raised above their heads. The heroes hurried to their sides as they exited the building. As All Might readied itself to charge forward, each individual was led to the on-scene medics. However, the entire structure trembled as soon as the final hostage left. All they could do was watch as it appeared to still. Many of the heroes trailed behind All Might as he hurried in first. He rushed through the doors and easily made his way through the main hall. But he couldn't find anything. Nothing was there. No equipment, no villains. He then discovered the lab in ruins after walking there. There was a deep crater within the structure where a work area had once been. All Might clenched his jaw again. He had been given the slip by them. Similar to that monster, Izuku was ecstatic, even giddy. His strategy had succeeded. All Might had been stopped. Now that all of his droids had returned, his secret laboratory could be put together. The warehouse was no longer his only source of illicit activity. He was prepared to increase his illicit activities after having the issues perform so much excavating in the past 2 months. The warehouse was still with him. He will continue to utilize it for his PAMs and other legal work. However, he had more ambitious aspirations and other employment options. All he needed to do now was put it up. As he concluded another phone call, the commissioner groaned, "For the last time, we can't afford to send a search team down into the sewers. Nor can we risk trying to dig into the tunnels. There's no telling just how deep they go or where they start or where they end." After the Dynamo robbery, everyone was furious. Police officers and heroes were eager to chase after them. The Hero Commission attempted to evict them and demanded that they provide them with assistance. Because All Might himself appeared and the criminals managed to escape, the media was exaggerating the situation. It's not as though they're not in pain. He must be concerned about villains disabling entire squads of his officers with those same weapons. He must watch for the next burst of action, while also having to thwart the schemes of other arbitrary baddies. The commissioner sighed when the phone rang once again, realizing he would have to say it again. As the other end of the phone rambled on, Izuku halted and said, "Yes, I wish to purchase the warehouse. The warehouse in question is unknown and rather isolated. With it I can improve the production of the PAM units and even began working on future projects. Yes, I know I don't have enough funds to purchase it on my own, that's why I just need to take out a loan, then I'll pay it back." Izuku went on. "Oh, the warehouse in question. It's just along, yes I know that's close to that one warehouse that was raided by heroes a couple months ago. All I need is a sign and a permit alongside the deed and I can set up a proper shop not in my house," Izuku said as the speaker stopped. Izuku ended the call by saying, "You'll think about it, thanks. I'll reimburse you once I have more. Thank you, have a good day." With a groan, he put his phone in his pocket. He eyed his laptop and muttered, "Just a few more days." A large-scale operation is displayed on the screen. Izuku laughed and then looked at the television. He kept hearing the same tale about his robbery. No one is stupid enough to dig up the whole goddamn city, not enough the HSPC president. Izuku grumbled. Returning to his laptop, he started directing the flow of further resources in the direction of the construction. All for One would have been glaring at the screen if he had eyes, but instead he merely stared down at it. The 4 machines, well, now 11 machines, had come into contact. They simply vanished into a hole in the ground after stripping a whole support company bare. It was the second funniest thing he had ever seen, and not even All Might could stop it. Oaf's face after he killed his teacher was the only thing funny. However, this is a problem as well as a solution. He was underground. He's underground. He has an extensive collection of digging and echolocation quirks, as well as more than enough throwaway Numu. He only has to get to work excavating. He summoned a nearby phone and dialed a number using a quirk. As the doctor answered, he continued, "Doctor, I prepare 12 first gens, I'll be fitting them with basic echolocation and subterranean capabilities. It's time to uncover this upstart." As Izuku watched his PAM units start assembling in the freshly acquired warehouse, he grinned. Although he now genuinely owns the warehouse, it remains the same as before. He took care to conceal the tunnel that led from the warehouse to his illicit activities. The tunnel itself was sealed up, the modifications were concealed, and he even ordered the construction of a new entrance that could only be reached through the sewers. He could relax for the time being while his PAMs and his latest invention built up a production line. Nedzu looked at the 3 maps he was looking at. One of the sewers, one of the city, and one of the subway tunnels. He was under pressure from the police to map the area and determine the exact spot where they needed to strike. But there was one obvious problem. The sewers and subways aren't the only tools this villain, whatever they are, is using. Who knows where they might put up, but they're excavating all over the city. To find this criminal, he would require a devoted crew and much more sophisticated technologies. However, the HSPC, the police, and the media do not want that. They want to find this villain right away, notwithstanding all the issues that would come up if you try to do that. Izuku laughed as he made his way through the sewers. He was trying a full-body exosuit, one of his most recent inventions. Even though his plan had succeeded and the encounter with All May had scared him, he kept thinking about what may have happened if it hadn't. He has come to this because he fears being connected to them and the law learning about his actions. In addition, he has no desire to contract an illness down here. To find out how well his R&B models performed in the construction of an underground base, he is now testing out his new exosuit. He receives instructions to his new base of operations via the built-in screen of the helmet. Izuku then turned to face the wall as the image on the television changed. His screen was pointed directly through the wall, yet it had the same appearance as the rest of the wall. With the metal gloves gliding over the stonework, he extended his arm forward. Something then rushed through his hand. Then, the stone's gauges lit dimly before revealing a hatch. He had to fight the urge to feel proud of the task his machines had accomplished on their own. The hatch closed behind him as he passed through. The hallway of metal went on, twisting and shrinking in length from time to time. Then he discovered another door, this one with only a basic latch. Izuku opened it and saw something that made him grin. The entire structure had been excavated, with plastic and metal forming a shell to prevent the roof from collapsing in on it. There was a sizable open space designated for his machinery, and the lab was obviously distinct from the workshop, which were all in a tidy line and prepared for their next task. He grinned as he strolled calmly over to the freshly configured computer. The screens came to life as the network connected to his exosuit. He was able to relate to and feel everything. Then he became aware of something. A massive radar that could map the entire surrounding area was one of the defenses put in place. It covered an area more than 20 times the lab's size. It had only just arrived at the perimeter and was already getting closer, so there was a significant trigger. He started the issue MK1s on decoy runs after activating them. On an intercept course, the droids rapidly drilled into the soft ground. He then armed and activated the brick units. He was not going to allow them to approach his new hiding place. No matter what they were. He turned on a few of the built-in cameras in his issue MK1s against his better judgment. Izuku wanted to know what he was up against because some of them had already arrived at the big unknown mass. He started formulating plans for how to deal with this. Had he become too cocky? Had his base been found by the heroes already? He wished he hadn't when he realized what was coming. Weird animals. Their bodies were stuck in a bipedal shape, and their brains were malformed. They just had big brains that occupied the most of their heads, they lacked skulls. Like his issues, their claws clawed through the ground. The most unsettling thing, though, was how much they all looked alike. The heroes weren't like this. This was hardly a haphazard group of villains. Hell itself had dispatched its creatures to pull him down there, was all that could be thought of. Only the words, "What the fuck," could escape his lips. He then clenched his jaw as he noticed some of the animals shift course and begin adhering to his issue MK1s. Since he needed to switch strategies, he turned on one of the newly installed scanners he had put to his issue MK1s. As he turned on his brick models, different bits of information began to stream across his screens. He had the bricks move in pairs down the several issue tunnels, their mass shock gauntlets charging slowly along the way. Simultaneously, he had the issues begin to move the items from their starting point to the upper left. He was not going to allow the owner of these things to get close to his base. He prayed a little to Kami that this would work. He eagerly awaited the monsters' pursuit of an issue he had set up as bait. As the others excavated the ground around them, they watched as they drew closer. The earth below became unstable as the issues started to be dug up. As the creatures dug deeper than the disturbance that caused the fall, the ground broke away and the issues ran away. He then ordered the bricks to line up in ranks along the tunnels that were closest to the big hole. The bricks blazed at full voltage as the creatures fought their way upward. There was smoke instead of a scream. In order to maintain their power and minimize internal damage, Izuku had the bricks cease fire and retreat. More data moved around his screens as the issues scanned the creatures in the pit. Their brains were scattered all around them, and their skin was scorched to a crisp. Izuku watched the scene through the screens of his exosuit and computer, fighting the impulse to throw up. This was something he had done, something his own weapon had done. Before he got up and took off his helmet, he typed a command to get everything back and tidy it up. His breathing became more rapid and much more irregular as the layers cleansed air passed through his body. He had never killed anything till now. Even so, the creature he killed appeared to have escaped from a horror book. He wasn't sure what his true feelings should be in this situation. He still needed to understand what the hell these things were, though. Additionally, he had to demolish the whole tunnel that these creatures had excavated. He was shivering because they had arrived at the scanner perimeter of his new base shortly after his own arrival. He was therefore planning to retaliate. Even the HSPC isn't so desperate or corrupt. These things aren't with the heroes. He was up against a villain with significant support. But what should be done about the big tunnel? Who knows how long the monsters had been excavating for, but the thing went on for kilometers. As the others started to demolish the tunnel, he made the foolish decision to send one of his issue MK1s to follow it. He could exact some revenge on this other villain if he could find out where they were. Izuku shook his head because he was planning too much. Now, he replaced his helmet and looked at the prizes. He had just one from this disagreement. Izuku examined the creatures, collected remnants. As Izuku had the issue models scan them, R&B models were diligently studying them all around him. As the data slowly trickled in, his helmet screen resembled a river of flashing information. Blood types, BMI, bone marrow, DNA, and many other information were being gradually gathered. Every creature was dismembered, with its numerous parts and limbs being kept in containers close by. He was even able to connect to the surface-level police databank by running the data through his network. Izuku had made a terrifying discovery as a result of this. At one time or another, all of these things were people. Before becoming these mindless animals, they were all normal people who loved, worked, and had families. He felt like throwing up when he considered how these things came to be. He growled as he looked over each missing person's data, those sick fucks. Izuku stepped aside to let his R&B models to complete the dissection. Going back to the computer, he entered an order into the issue droid that was pursuing the beast through its tunnel. He wasn't going to allow the people who sent these items to identify him if they did find it. Then his attention was drawn to something else. Something else started to be picked up by the DNA scanners. Izuku turned in his chair and saw each beast's double helix model created on the screen. Some areas were emphasized, while others looked to have been hurriedly and terribly botched. However, he made his second terrible discovery while watching the feed. There were several quirks to these things. Nedzu only wanted to rest. Maybe sip on one of his imported Chinese teas. Once again, the HSPC was demanding any physically fit hero with expertise in hacking, excavation, search and rescue, and many other areas. It was really exaggerated. Chasing so many heroes would leave holes that many bad guys would be more than eager to fill. He had already argued with the agent about using a power loader and Smentos for this. For something that would take months, he couldn't simply allow them to take his primary support course instructor and emergency school repairman. He had no intention of leaving his school in such a precarious state. His phone then rang. Nedzu scowled as he grabbed it up. Once more, the droids had attacked. This time, a whole plant was completely demolished and partially buried in the darkness. After taking a deep breath, Nedzu sprung from his chair and proceeded to one of his cabinets. He produced a bundle of tea leaves from a locked wooden box that he had unlocked using a 3-digit code. We had a long day ahead of us. Tamura watched the most recent news story and moaned, why does this Joker get to be on the news so much? The same bunch had robbed a whole factory before allowing its entire first floor to sink into the ground. They were much bigger now than they had been the prior time. He was attempting to collect fodder and mooks for his attack on UA with the sensei's gift. However, the clamor surrounding this most recent heist was too loud for anything to penetrate. Kurogiri, he cried out. The butler turned to Tamura after emerging in a cloud of fog. He said, "Yes, young master." Tamura pointed to the TV and screamed, "I want this fucker dead, he's ruining our representative before we can even get it off the ground." Kurogiri simply sighed and glanced at him. "Young master, Sensei has an interest in him. He believes that if we can create an alliance then we would become unstoppable," responded Kurogiri. "Why?" inquired Tamura. Kurogiri summed up by saying, "Imagine an army of robots, all at our beck and call." "Ah, but would a droid army truly stack up against the heroes?" replied Tamura. "Look for yourself, they can't catch him even with all the robberies committed," stated Kurogiri. Tamura's tone became increasingly agitated as he uttered, "He's digging, he's under the ground. He's a goddamn mole man. Why the hell should we work with him?" In his hands, All for One rummaged through the tablet. Before the Numu left his grasp, his tracking quirks had tracked them for 5 kilometers. He was then forced to rely on the trackers that had been implanted to determine their location. He was so taken aback when he noticed that all of the trackers abruptly stopped talking. Had the Numus resurfaced and been seen by police and heroes? Had they fired the group after striking a power line? Because they were first-generation Numu, did they simply fucking eat each other? For the half hour before they went black, Afo browsed the trackers, data feed. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Mole's family. Nothing, nothing. Sudden shift. Afo stopped when he noticed the Numus begin to move. Instead of continuing in a straight line, they started to circle before climbing. As the Numu group delved deeper and deeper before abruptly dropping, Afo focused even more. Then there was a moment of silence before a sudden electrical explosion fried all the trackers. This made it more focused. They either found food, followed it, and hit softer ground, which resulted in their mass execution by powerline. Or they were led somewhere and shocked to death. Afo replayed the Dynamo robbery footage, showing the group of witnesses being left writhing on the ground by a weapon of some kind. As he showed the trackers, final position before darkness fell, Afo whispered, "One step closer, then you'll be mine." Izuku gazed out over his enlarged laboratory. He felt compelled to grow quickly due to the fear of those animals. More brick and head models were being produced by machinery. By employing their scanners to look well beyond the base's own reach, issue models were serving as perimeter guards. There were R&B models everywhere. Some were preserving the base's expansion, while others were using the new equipment. Izuku had some people working on his latest project, his most recent invention to support his illicit endeavors. 4 machines known as the Ontier Squadron were created for biological and medicinal tasks. Izuku was aware of his limitations because he was a specialist in robotics and mechanics rather than genetics. Therefore, the Ontier Squadron was designed to cover that area. He was entering hazardous territory. Anything that would try to stop him had to be prepared for. Through works of quirk skill, the Ontiers would produce what he required to counter such things, filling in the gaps that technology cannot yet cover. The fact that he must do this left him with a bad taste in his mouth. He had no desire to become engaged with quirks. He had no desire to acquire one or figure out how to destroy one. But here he is, confronted with a group that apparently has the ability to alter a person's genetic makeup to the point where they can give them several quirks. Projects from the Ontier were now to be considered a last resort. He might be upgrading his machines with each robbery, but he doesn't want to be dependent on their labor. But if he's facing away from the wall, it's good to have something to utilize. Yes, I know that it will be costly, but I want to make a demonstration. It's thanks to that video that people started buying the PAMs. If we can do the same with this new model, then it will make far more. Izuku spoke on the phone. I know it will be difficult to get some police and first responders on scene to help with the demonstrations, but this can help, Izuku stated. As the phone continued to chatter, Izuku paused and said, "Okay, you'll do it, thank you. I need to find the site for it." "Okay, I've been looking already," Izuku replied. Izuku let his arm drop, and he concluded, "Yes, thank you, I'll see you at the demonstration." He combed his hair with his hand. Why does business have to be more complex than crime? He bemoaned. Izuku switched to his applications in search of a nearby building company that would fit inside his budget. After creating a short selection, he determined which would work best for the demonstration. He closed his phone and murmured, "Now, let's see how much money I can get from this." All for One reclined in his seat. As the news resumed, he snarled, "You sly son of a bitch." His desire to ultimately win this technician over to his cause only grew with each report. An entire factory was captured in the middle of the night, with the entire first level submerged. The fact that this heist was carried out without any bloodshed is even more amazing. However, a foe is certain that he can arouse the villain's bloodlust in a matter of days. He had dispatched a small contingent of Lower Numu to pursue the trail, this time without any further quirks. They only needed to test how far they could go, they didn't need to get to where the previous group had fallen. The telephone then rang. When he saw the caller's ID, he said, "Yes." Garaki's voice boomed over the phone, "We have something getting closer, it's following the tunnel. It already passed the Numu we sent in." A foe sneered, "Send a Numu to retrieve it." "I did, sir. The Numu can't get it without destabilizing the whole thing. The intruder is digging through the ground over a meter away from the tunnel," replied Garaki. "Fine, wait for the intruder to get closer, then activate one of the scramblers," a foe said, to which Garaki replied, "Understood, sir." A foe reclined once again. As he tracked the data on his tablet, a foe mumbled, "So, he's trying to get to us. I can use this." Izuku saw the issue MK1 he had sent after the tunnel abruptly come to a halt. The droid simply stopped, but the protected tracker was untouched. Before it completely darkened and the info became jumbled, it at least had time to show him the other end of the tunnel. Izuku turned on the issue's failsafe while trembling. As the tracker and every other component of the droid stopped, he saluted briefly. He looked at the other screen, the one that displayed the new group of objects traveling down the tunnel. He aimed 2 more issue droids at them, intending to bury the creatures and demolish the tunnel. It was going to be a long day, so Izuku leaned back. Izuku strolled into the demonstration scene with composure. A pair of PAMs pulled a cart behind him, and few people paid him any attention. As he made his way to the stage, the assembled audience mused. There was another little group on stage. The demonstration was aided by a tiny line of investors, the local police precinct chief, and the couple who owned the building company. After looking over his ID, an agent came up to him and gave him a tiny microphone. As he entered the stage, he accepted the item and placed it on his head. He tested the piece's response by tapping it. The queue behind him gave a slight nod to begin. As the speakers let his voice burst, he exclaimed, "Hello, hello, thank you everyone for showing up. You may not know me, but you do recognize the droids behind me." When the PAMs revealed what was underneath the tarp, he said, "Many of you have seen my PAMs in action before, but now I have another model to show you today. Behold." It was a brand new droid, far more durable and marginally bigger than the PAMs. It had a prominent top that was covered in an extensive collection of plates. 4 sets of arms were tucked along a sturdy frame that encircled the main body. It had 3 wheels inside each of its 4 distinct treads, which were triangle-shaped. As the device powered up, Izuku introduced it, saying, "What you see here is my autonomous search, rescue, and recovery droid. The ASRR or Azure Model Droid." As the machine started to roll around on stage, Izuku remarked, "This machine is designed to act alongside first responders in emergency situations. With powerful hydraulic arms and all-terrain treads, the Azure can go almost anywhere in case of disasters." The Azure went to the adjoining building site after driving to the right of the stage. "Thanks to help from the Uraraka Construction Company, we have set up the nearby site to demonstrate some of the Azure's capabilities in an urban environment," Izuku told the two as he gestured. The Azure pulled up to the construction site, pausing briefly while a worker nearby hid behind a bulletproof glass wall. As the worker took out a remote, Izuku remarked, "The Azure is designed to withstand high-stress situations and build with the means to match it." Drop the bar. A huge steel beam dropped from a neighboring crane, and the Azure froze. The big chunk of metal flew down, and the audience gasped. At one point, Azure's limbs flew from its body and the metal plates on its head moved, forming a huge shield. Its arms sprang out and grabbed the droid before the steel beam could hit it. The droid dropped the metal directly to the right of the beam after allowing its right arms to support its weight. The plates moved once more, reverting to their previous position. As the droid turned to face the audience and picked up the steel beam again, Izuku remarked, "That's not all the Azure is capable of with its powerful arms." The Azure's 4 arms bent the steel beam at various angles with minimum effort. As the droid proceeded, Izuku remarked, "Now, the Azure isn't just about brute strength." Another piece of bulletproof glass divided the portion it drove to. Beneath a small pile of building materials, a guy lay prone. As it approached him, the Azure extended its hydraulics and started to delicately clear the debris from above him. After removing enough debris, the Azure started to remove the man by pulling the remaining debris up. As the plates started to flatten out into a big, flat shape, its main body started to move and the frame appeared to sink into itself. Before the Azure straightened out and started to drive, the throng watched as it pulled the man onto the freshly created flat. After leaving the area, the man leaned up, causing the machine to shift its main body and stop driving, allowing the man to exit the apartment. The Azure is designed to help aid evacuations and rescue trapped civilians in high-stress situations. Thanks to the hard hat on the top of the Azure, it can be used to both protect itself and also aid civilians in such situations. Izuku remarked while the Azure appeared to be nodding. Izuku said, "Now, does anyone have any questions?" A number of hands raised, and Izuku gestured to one at random. One reporter questioned, "Sir, is this machine meant to act as competition to heroes on the scene?" Before pointing to another questioner, Izuku said, "No, the Azure is a supplement in such missions. Designed to help fill in the gaps of manpower and take on dangerous situations for the sake of civilian safety." The reporter inquired, "Just how durable is this machine?" The Azure is designed to withstand several thousand tons of pressure, large explosions, and both forms of extreme temperature. I just haven't made such a demonstration due to the danger involved." Izuku responded. Someone questioned, "Are you connected with these mass villain attacks?" Izuku said, "Excuse me." The gathering around him dispersed as that same individual walked closer. Sir Nighteye approached the crowd's front. Nighteye said again, "Are you connected with the villain attacks?" Izuku turned to find that Nighteye's appearance had taken the village chief by surprise. Izuku sighed and took a deep breath. Izuku turned to face the rest of the audience and said, "I won't lie. I've seen those things on TV, and I've been scared that this would happen. I am not with those villains." As Nighteye put it, "Don't dodge the question. Sir, while I do not wish to interfere with such investigation, this is an unwarranted interrogation without legal backing and I will have to ask you to leave before security gets involved." Izuku replied, leaning down and shutting off the microphone. Izuku was aware of his quirk and became anxious about what Nighteye could notice as he stared him down. Nighteye departed with what appeared to be a sigh. He said, "Good luck on the business," while Izuku shook his head. Izuku got back up and switched on his microphone. Before moving on to the next question, Izuku said, "Sorry about that, the crime spree has left a lot of people on edge." Power Loader pointed to the television and remarked, "See Nedzu, we can see his face now." Nedzu moved away from Power Loader and remarked, "Yes, his machines are most interesting. Though I have to do something now." He took his phone out and punched in a number. Nedzu scoffed as soon as the phone was picked up. "Nighteye, what are you doing?" he exclaimed in a distressed tone. "That's not important. I have some information that would interest you," responded Nighteye. Nedzu inquired, "What would that be?" "He's going to be targeted. When I looked into his eyes I saw him working on some machine, then something attacked him from the shadows. It was tall and imposing, it even had a tail. The boy is in danger," stated Nighteye. Nedzu questioned, "Who do you think would do such a thing?" "Maybe villains, maybe the HSPC. We both know they aren't happy with how successful the Azure may end up being," stated Nighteye. "Indeed, it may be best to put him under watch. However, I still can't help but think that your method was rather unnecessary." Nedzu responded, "I know, but the villain group has been getting more bold. I had to see if there was a connection. A young man with such a skill in robotics pops up around the same time as a villain with a small army of machines. That isn't a coincidence." Nighteye responded. Nedzu remarked, "I understand. Just prepare yourself for some backlash." Nighteye said, "I will, have a good day." Before hanging up, Nedzu said, "Good day." All for one gazed at the solid mass of metal in the Numu's hand and said, "Doctor, what is this?" "This is our intruder. What's left of it to be precise," remarked Garaki. "Really?" inquired a foe. Shortly after the scrambler got the machine it activated some kind of fail-safe. "Left only a pile of slag behind," replied Garaki. A foe lowered his head to feel the hardened metal slab. "Anything else?" inquired a foe. "The tunnel was sabotaged not long after. The pack we had sent in has yet to be recovered," remarked Garaki. A foe said, "Great, just great. Garaki, while my student is attacking UA, I want you to prepare a group of Numus with electric quirks, sensors, and strength boosters." A foe said, "Have the data from the first 2 packs analyzed, we know that we're close." A foe gave the order. Garaki said, "At once, sir." The dry voice of a foe remarked, "Soon, very soon." As Mina watched the film, she questioned, "So, this is the guy who helped your family?" "Yeah, I only heard them talking over the phone. I never expected him to look so." Ochako continued to speak. "Cute," Mina answered back. Ochako attempted to dispute, saying, "What? I mean," Mina teased, "OMG, you have a crush." Aizawa entered the rooms just as Ochako was going to quarrel, and every student straightened up. Izuku worked diligently on the computer before him. He tried to slow his breathing, but there was a sense of dread hanging over his shoulder. He had been afraid of being exposed ever since Nighteye appeared. However, it didn't appear to occur. He felt like he was being watched, and he was seeing heroes more frequently. He couldn't risk it, therefore he hadn't gone back to the lair yet. He therefore came up with a backup, risky method of entry utilizing his phone. The issue units were constructing a new tunnel from his lair to the warehouse as he sat back and waited. Fortunately, he can still send commands via his phone, so he could still fix any issues that could have arisen while he was stranded outside the lab. When his phone buzzed, Izuku furrowed his brow. There was no urgency at the lair, and he wasn't anticipating a call today. When he looked down, he saw that he was being called by an unknown number. He reluctantly picked up the phone and said, "Hello." The opposing side's reaction was, "Is this Midoriya Izuku? My name is Nedzu." Nedzu, the principal of UA, cursed inwardly like Izuku did, was phoning him. Izuku inquired, "What do you wish to talk about?" "Well, young Midoriya, I wish to purchase some of your Azure models and test them in the USJ. I am more than willing to send you the footage of their results in the place in exchange for a discount." Nedzu speculated. Izuku hesitated, wondering what he should do. Izuku poked the rat and said, "How much of a discount? I can only go so low. I was thinking of only a 5% discount. I just need 3 or 4 Azure models." Nedzu responded, "I currently have 10 in stock. Is there a location you want them shipped?" Izuku inquired, "Just 2 UA, is there anything else Midoriya?" Nedzu replied, "No, I can get you 3 models in a couple days." Izuku replied. Nedzu replied, "Pleasure doing business with you Midoriya." Izuku answered, "A pleasure," and hung up the phone. After putting his phone in his pocket, Izuku leaned back and combed through his hair. Before entering his warehouse, Izuku remarked, "Good to see he isn't mad about me rejecting his offer for UA." He walked toward the line of Azure models he had completed. Power Loader said, "So, we finally get some new toys." Nedzu simply placed his phone down and nodded in agreement. Nedzu inquired, "You track his signal?" "Couldn't crack it. The kid's done some modifications to his phone that makes it almost impossible to trace," responded Power Loader. This caused Nedzu to frown. He bemoaned, if only he had accepted. Power Loader simply shook his head. "We can't get everyone. All we can do now is keep the HSPC away from him," remarked Power Loader. "I know, we just have to keep such a young man safe, but I have other ideas." Nedzu replied. Nedzu grinned as Power Loader looked at him curiously. Izuku's gaze was fixed on the television before him. The Ontiers were hard at work on their next batch of samples, according to the notification on his phone. He would prefer to see them all disappear, but he has no idea how many of those products are in use or who makes them. But there wasn't much he could do about them. They would continue to be an issue until he was able to destroy their center of creation. Already, he was giving orders to the Ontier forces to develop a defense against these threats. Another concern is the amount of time and money required to build it. Project Cell would be left to the Ontiers to work on independently until then. Izuku strolled down the street with his hair tucked into the ball cap he wore. A flat cart with a tarp on top was being pulled by 2 PAMs behind him. He thought about dressing in a pretty upscale disguise, but the PAMs behind him revealed most of it. If he recalled properly, a hero named Snipe was following him closely behind. As he brought the Azure models to UA, he was serving as his escort. Izuku didn't mind him because he is aware of the dangers his displays provide. He is aware of what would happen to him if the HSPC believed he posed a danger to their ideal society. He took out his phone and looked at the time and place. Now it wasn't that far. Izuku nodded after turning around to make sure Snipe could see his eyes. The gates to UA were then visible to him. High school. Few kids would be outside to see him because it was almost midday. He could hear Snipe speeding up as he approached. A rescue hero named 13 emerged from the gates. She went outside and waved to him, and Izuku waved back. "Young Midoriya, You have the bots for us? She inquired. Izuku gave a nod, then motioned to the PAMs. The droids did the same, taking off the tarp to show 3 Azure models that were not in use. As some UA said, Izuku responded, as promised. The cart was taken by robots that drove out. You know Midoriya, with skills like this you'd make a great hero. 13 replied. When the PAMs began folding up the cart, Izuku answered, I've been told. As he passed him, Snipe added, still Power Loader would love to meet ya. Izuku just shrugged and turned around. As he started to leave, Izuku remarked, it's been a pleasure doing business with you. He was succeeded by the PAMs. Now kid, I can't just let ya walk back unprotected. Snipe replied. Izuku continued, saying, I know Snipe, I'm walking right now. Knowing that Snipe would keep an eye on his back until he got back to the warehouse, he didn't bother to look back. With the folding cart between their hydraulic arms, the PAMs hummed softly. He was ignored by the public, who were more interested in the hero who was following him than in his PAMs. He didn't worry that it would take him an additional hour to return to the warehouse. Taking a stroll around the city only served to remind him of his motivation. Why he decided to play a villain and why he prepared to restore the heyday of technology. Seeing a hero battle a random robber, destroying portions of the road in the process. The picture of a single homeless man trying desperately to earn money by strumming a guitar. As he passed the man, Izuku threw some yen in his direction. He always aimed to assist others. But because the world saw him as this worthless Deku, they consistently shot him down. If he needs to defeat every hero and villain that stands in his way, he won't let this deter him. He will find a way to proceed even if All Might himself were to stand in his way. Something slammed into his legs, interrupting his inner monologue. When he peered down, he saw a young child staring up at him with scared eyes and white hair. Snipe ran over to him to examine her, as if she noticed this also. A tiny horn on her forehead spoke through her long hair as she gazed up at him in terror. As he leaned down, Izuku could feel that fire in his heart, the same heat that had been there when the PAM first came to him. As Izuku gazed into her crimson eyes with his cool green ones, the girl appeared to relax. Izuku looked at Snipe and she said, please, don't let them take me back. Izuku was aware of his obligation to swallow up any grudges he could have had. After putting his arms around her, he started to run back to UA. He was followed closely by Snipe and the PAMs. Snipe had already called Nedzu and briefed him about the events of the previous moment. The gates of UA appeared to be opened by another hero. With his PAMs close behind him, he ignored them as the gate beeped to let him in. Izuku simply kept moving forward when the hero remarked, follow me, there's a shortcut to the nurse's office. Her eyes were still fixed on his as he glanced down at the youngster in his arms. A little girl who suffered maltreatment at the hands of an unknown monster. It served as a sobering reminder of how terrible monsters may be in today's world. In an attempt to console her, he ran a hand through her hair. Even though he wouldn't have refused her, she hadn't let him go since he had picked her up. Eri was the young girl's name, she had no last name. The UA heroes, Recovery Girl in particular, were busy coming up with ideas for how to respond to this new development. Knowing that they might try to manipulate this to keep him here, Izuku simply sighed. Izuku simply turned to her and allowed her to lean closer to him as Eri appeared to brighten up. Recovery Girl had already taken the time to examine her condition. Izuku was just horrified by her state. She was malnourished, sleep-deprived, physically and psychologically mistreated, and who knew what more they had done to her. He wouldn't think twice about frying the villains who did this if he ever met them. Eri gripped him more tightly as the door opened. The detective who had just been introduced remarked, hello young Midoriya, I am Detective Tsukauchi. I was sent here to assist in the investigation on young Eri's tormentors. Eri attempted to hide behind Izuku as he nodded. It's okay little miss. We're going to stop the men who did this to you. We just need your help for this. The cop replied. Izuku told Eri, it'll be okay. Eri gazed up at him. Eri turned to face him and made an effort to appear brave. Good, now I need both of your statements. Recovery Girl already gave me a rundown of her condition, so I just need your stories. The cop said. Izuku first spoke after noticing that Eri was still feeling a little uneasy. I was walking back home after making an exchange with UA, 3 Azure units in exchange for payment and footage of their success in USJ testing. While I was walking, Eri bumped into my leg and held on, then she said, please don't let them take me back. Eri interrupted that. Izuku just gave her a reassuring embrace. As Eri laid her head on his shoulder, Izuku confessed, I ran back to UA, Snipe was still escorting me so he followed after me. It's thanks to him that we managed to get her to the recovery room quickly. The investigator simply smiled slightly and shook his head. Well, young man, I'm happy that you weren't seen by the villains in question. That just means we'll have to hide the young miss rather than your whole family. Tsukauchi responded. Izuku nodded, aware that his actions could result in him and his mother being placed under witness protection. Izuku inquired, has my mother been informed? In response, the investigator said, yes, as we speak she's being escorted to UA by heroes. Izuku simply sighed, thinking, Mom is going to lose it when she finds out why they brought her here. Either way, I am happy to report that we can start building a case against Eri tormentors, maybe even get some heroes involved. Tsukauchi stated. Izuku simply nodded without saying anything. Tsukauchi stood up after saying, but, once your mother comes, we will start talking about what would be best for young Eri. Tsukauchi simply bowed and left the room as Izuku remarked, have a good night, officer. Izuku gave the small girl a gentle shake and murmured, hey Eri. Yeah, she inquired. Before he resumed stroking Eri's hair, Izuku remarked, you're going to meet my mother, she's just as kind as I am, but she's more expressive. Until his mother was brought in, he kept doing this. As she gazed at the young child, hardly asleep at her son's side, she stopped asking any inquiries. As Inko approached Eri warily and extended a hand to her, Izuku grinned. Eri stared at her and accepted the outstretched hand as Inko smiled reassuringly at her. Izuku woke up in bed. Eri struggled to go to sleep, clinging to his side. 3 days had passed since her official adoption into the family. He hadn't done anything with his machines in 3 days. He didn't want to endanger her. If he went to the warehouse on foot, she would be in danger. If he worked on any of his machines, she would be in danger. He doesn't even want to discuss what would occur if she was to find upon his illicit ventures. Izuku began to moan in her sleep and simply ran a hand through her hair. The white hair has been transformed into a dark green color that closely resembles his own. A quirk that altered her look was hiding her horn. It was very impossible to identify Eri from before because she now resembled his biological younger sister. In order to assist her in this circumstance, Inko considered purchasing her something. They simply couldn't agree on what to get her. He intended to acquire Eri a pet of some kind, either a Riley cat that would soothe her or a shelter dog that was very patient. Inko wanted to purchase her a big plush animal, either a dog or a rabbit. In any case, Eri was going to receive all the love and support she could possibly require. Today, Bakugo was furious. He watched Deku make some tin cans in his dumb presentation. He seems to be attempting to substitute machines for heroes. He wouldn't tolerate that. He only needed to wait till Saturday to express his feelings to Deku. Heroes are more capable than Deku's tin can. When he destroyed that damn notebook, he ought to have given up. But he didn't. Deku is currently offering randos tin cans. Deku is profiting from selling out those fucking metal dildos and tin cans, demonstrating that metal dildo he calls the Azure in cooperation with Round Cheek's family. Who the devil is he to announce himself? Just wait. Deku, I'll be speaking with you as well in 2 days. Eri began to run a hand through the ball of fur in front of her and hesitantly extended her hand. Leaning into the tiny hand that caressed her fur, the cat simply purred in return. She had a big, fluffy bunny with drooping ears in her other hand. Izuku reached an agreement with his mother. Both of them got her something to help her heal. After purchasing mochi from a local shelter, Izuku fell deeply in love with the cat after witnessing its tolerance around kids and kittens. Mochi lay against Eri, who just kept petting her. Izuku was pleased that Eri was genuinely discovering delight in life, and a feeling of pride welled up in his breast. Robotics and villainy were put on weight since he needed to assist this young girl in getting better. As he heard the report from his subordinates, Overhaul squinted. The most important component of his scheme, Eri, was gone, and they were unable to locate her. He has no idea where they took her, and they didn't even get a chance to see the guy who took her. Before taking off a glove, he waited for the two crooks to finish their conversation. As he got closer, the two men retreated a step. He didn't care that they tried to reason with him and implore him. He was progressively fused into the floor by his hand reaching into the first one. The only sign of his presence was the lasting impression of his anguished face on the floor. When the second attempted to flee, his body was brutally minced, and the floor surrounding him turned to sand. After putting the glove back on, Overhaul checked his suit to make sure he was not covered in blood. Overhaul said, "Chrono, any word from our moles in the police?" To his assistant who was close. Chrono answered, "No word, sir, whoever took her hasn't gone to the police." He turned to Chrono, and Overhaul hissed. Overhaul ordered them to gather as many mooks that we can spare, start combing the city. Chrono said, "It will be done, sir." With a groan at the abrupt alteration to his plans, Overhaul reclined on his chair. As Chrono began giving orders, Overhaul murmured, "You can't hide forever, Eri. When I find you I will make you beg for mercy." Izuku gazed at JNR, while Eri stood behind her. Izuku merely grinned before going up to the droid. While patting the PAM model on its head, Izuku remarked, "There's nothing to worry about, JNR. Here is something I made to help people." Eri approached the machine slowly, a hand out, and gazed at it. Junior emitting a tiny beep as one of its hydraulic arms gradually reached out to touch Eri's hand. Eri staggered ahead as JNR. Permit her to encircle its metal claw with her fingertips. Izuku then heard someone knock on the door. Izuku turned to it, and Eri appeared to jump. Eri nodded, and Izuku continued, "Stay here, JNR. Can protect you if things go badly." He got up and took out his phone to see if there had been any news about his other ventures. There was no indication of an impending villain from the heroes on patrol. Nothing in his lab is tripping the grid. There was no attempt to enter the warehouse. Another pounding on the door caused Izuku to crack his knuckles and cautiously pocket his phone. Bakugo's booming voice said, "Open up, Deku." Izuku listened to Bakugo's ranting and scowled. He quickly reached for and put on a pair of experimental gloves he had been working on. Izuku opened the door and saw a furious Bakugo standing there. With annoyance, Izuku said, "What do you want, Bakugo?" Pulling the door open, Bakugo stepped directly into his face. Izuku's brows tightened as Bakugo yelled, "The fuck you doing, Deku?" Trying to make a fool out of the hero's huh? Izuku braced his arms and said, "I don't know what you're going on about, Bakugo." Bakugo yelled, "Don't you fucking talk back to me," and slammed his arm forward. Izuku grabbed Bakugo by the wrist and applied pressure on his arteries with his thumb. Bakugo tried to use his second arm, but it was stuck much like the other one. Izuku responded, "What are you trying to accomplish here, Bakugo? Do you really think this will turn out well for you?" Bakugo's nitroglycerin quirk made Izuku smell like burnt sugar, so he moved quickly. Bakugo squeezed both his wrists as firmly as his gloves would allow. Bakugo's hands started to twist and he sneered. As they continued to struggle, Izuku cautioned, "Don't you fire those hands." Bakugo yelled, "Like I'd listen to you, Deku." As sparks flew from his hands. Ready to shatter one of his wrists if necessary, Izuku braced himself. The sparks then ceased, and Bakugo's waist was encircled by something. A harsh voice demanded, "What the hell is happening here?" Seeing that it was one of the heroes he had seen at UA, Izuku turned to face the source. The hero interrupted him, saying, "Fuck off, I'm teaching this, shut up Bakugo, I'm the one asking questions here." Izuku sighed as he took in the scene before him. "If you must know, sir. I was at home when Bakugo started banging on my door. He started threatening me and was going to use his quirk on me, until you stepped in." Izuku swiftly clarified his position. With a faint red glow beneath his goggles, the hero scowled at Bakugo. As Bakugo began to struggle, the hero stated, "Bakugo Katsuki, you're coming with me." "What the hell are you doing, taking shitty Deku's side?" replied Bakugo. "You can't walk out of this one, Bakugo." The hero drew Bakugo closer, saying, "For attempted assault of someone under protection of heroes. I'm sorry for not stepping in sooner. Had I realized what he was going to do I would have stopped him before he was even at the door." The hero offered an apology. "It's no issue, I'm just glad that," Izuku said, fading away. The hero poked her, "She's doing well." Bakugo simply stared at Izuku as if he were insane, and Izuku replied, "Better than before." Before taking out his phone, the hero appeared to smile. Izuku pointed to a camera near the door and said, "I also have security footage if you need of it." The hero remarked, "That will be helpful." Bakugo appeared to have an epiphany. When a police car pulled up to take him away, his expression remained the same. Both Izuku and the hero provided statements. The others turned to Bakugo when the video was played. Bakugo kept his gaze on Izuku until the automobile had gone off, and Izuku simply shook his head. All for one relaxed. The Numas were nearly finished. His protege will soon terrorize the UA. Garaki has the ability to strike the new player on the field. He would soon have the inventor under his control. With his numus and an endless number of subordinates, he could imagine all the technology and an army of robots at his disposal. A means of sweeping the entire hero civilization. Tear through it with raw power, not with deceit like he had done previously. Yes, he missed the days before all of this dubious activity, seeing ships moving across the skies while machinery completed the labor that was thought to be unneeded. Then quirks appeared, which were both a boon and a bane. The instability brought on by such an entity and its increasing population. He observed the destruction and reconstruction of the globe, watched as the emergence of quirks pushed aside and forgotten the technology of the past. He felt saddened by the loss of all those accomplishments. He recalled being employed at a plant that gave the impression that Island was a rural farmhouse. How politicians blamed one another, burning the entire world. As his friends perished around him, he was forced to grasp a gun in his hands and fire round after round. Due to human hubris and avarice, everything that humanity had worked so hard to achieve was destroyed. And then quirks appeared, and then everything was repeated. So much was wrecked by two incidents that happened just 3 years apart. He recalled seeing a terrorist strike that caused one of the most well-known laboratories in the world to sink to the Marianas bottom. As terrorism and vigilantes demolished what had not yet been rebuilt, citizens and the government fought once more. He witnessed everything. He made his brother's survival possible. He realized the extent of humanity's decline and the necessary actions he had to take to protect them from one another. His brother disagreed, arguing that people needed to make their own decisions. He gave his brother a quirk to help him survive during their battle. He was fought with it by his brother. That quirk still exists now, more than 200 years later, much like himself. He is certain that his brother, who was imprisoned inside, had to observe the pitiful attempt by everyone to reconstruct, seen as they praised their purported improvements over the lost grandeur. He buried those memories once more as he stomped in sorrow. Perhaps this inventor could resurrect it and become unstoppable. Izuku combed through his phone's transmitted data. Mochi dozed on the foot of the bed while Eri slept soundly beside him. He was having more restless nights since he was constantly worrying about his new younger sister. During his absence, his illicit business had not suffered. In order to increase their numbers and the size of the lab, the issues and brick models were able to pilfer supplies from 3 additional factories. His auntiers were working diligently on their job as well, with the assistance of the other monsters. Unfortunately, his run-in with Bakugo served as yet another reminder of the reasons behind his decision to spend a portion of his day as a villain. In order for the R&B models to begin working on it, he was working on a smaller blueprint and transmitting the data via his phone. Legally speaking, he was able to install certain automated production lines to produce more PAMs and Azures. He left a simple set of AIs in charge of the warehouse, and they were continuing receiving supplies and placing orders. Eri mumbled something in her sleep and pulled him in closer. Izuku just put down his phone and put his arm around her, allowing her to fall asleep peacefully, with himself following closely behind. At the USJ, Nedzu grinned as he observed the Azures at work. At the moment, only 13 was in the building, but he could manage everything from his office, observing as the 3 machines removed rescue dummies and safely cleared debris. They had already completed the earthquake, rock slide, and fire zones in times comparable to those of some of his top pupils. Their hard helmets would just move around to shield them even as debris and rubble attempted to hurt them. The Azure models had also been purchased by numerous first responders, local factories, and construction organizations. The young man who created them was quickly emerging as a significant innovator to watch. He picked up the folder Eraserhead had left him and turned away from the computer. Having gone through the folder twice, he scowled at it. According to his record, Bakugo Katsuki was an all-star student, but anyone who spent too much time with him saw him as a blatant delinquent. Nedzu was suspicious that Bakugo and Midoriya had a past together because of his behavior last Saturday. One would prefer to forget the history, while the other would become fixated on it. Bakugo's parents had already been notified of his actions, and the police had already received his report. Nedzu accepted that they would yank him out and place him in juvenile custody after giving him one chance to reform. In every way, Bakugo ought to be confined to a juvenile detention facility for a month, but Nedzu is concerned about what Bakugo would do after that. Bakugo is an exceptional combat hero because of his quirk. To be honest, Nedzu was afraid of what he would do if he were a villain. Aside from his reprehensible actions, Bakugo was a stellar student who excelled in all areas of his studies, earning flawless grades and demonstrating unwavering resolve in all combat-related assignments. If a young man like him were denied the opportunity to become a hero, the villains could choose to have a fearsome fighter on their side. Or worse, being caught by the HSPC. He is receiving therapy, being watched closely at school, and being accompanied home by a UA-aligned hero, after the day is over. He was placed under increased observation for the next few days after his attempt against Midoriya was documented. All he wants is for Bakugo to truly take this as a lesson. Izuku, I know that you want to keep watch on Eri, but you can't do it all yourself. We both pay for bills here and I don't want you running behind on yours. Inko replied with authority. Izuku hadn't visited the warehouse since Eri entered their lives, so he knew this would happen. Before you argue about keeping watch over Eri, I managed to negotiate for reduced hours at my workplace. I'm now free on the weekends and every odd Wednesday. Most of my other shifts will be night shifts, so you only have to worry about her while I can't be home. Inko said while opening his mouth. All Izuku said was, you planned all of this for her, didn't you? Inko questioned, and if I did? Izuku hugged his mother without saying anything. Knowing that this was what he had been waiting for, Inko grinned. As Inko nodded, Izuku remarked, we stay in touch. If anything changes on your schedule, I want to know. I will. Now you go on and make something new to help people, Izu. Inko replied. Izuku nodded and released his mother. Now, with her plush bunny cradled in her arms, Eri had entered the room. Izuku responded, ah, Eri, we have some good news. Eri approached Inko and leaned toward her after glancing at them. Eri nodded, and Inko said, you heard it, didn't you, dear? Big brother is going to help more people, like he helped me? Asked Eri. Before picking up Eri, Inko responded, that's correct, Eri. He'll be making more machines to help people. When he isn't here, I'll be here for you, dear. Izuku grinned as he saw Eri's lips gradually lift at the corners. She was on the verge of grinning. She won't have to worry about the jerks who mistreated her for long. Izuku, however, has more work to do today. He gave them both another embrace. Eri tilted her head curiously as Izuku muttered, I'll be back, I want you to see my next droid before I reveal it to the public. More robots? Inquired Eri. As he tousled her hair, Izuku remarked, yep, more robots. Eri drew Izuku in as he attempted to get to his feet. She said, can I come there one day? Izuku gazed down, his gaze fixed intently on hers. Izuku remarked, getting to his feet, one day, when you're older. Eri gave a nod, and Inko got up and started for the kitchen. She said, see you later. Izuku wrote back, see you later. As he listened to her and Eri in the kitchen, Izuku thought, man, mom is a saint. As if he had never left, the gentle hum of machinery persisted. As PAMs kept the place running, inactive Azures lined up. Assembly boxes and conveyor belts with basic arms put in a lot of effort to produce additional machines. Izuku can now get to work on his next one. His computer was processing designs. Websites and AI are attempting to convert the design into a believable frame. The droid was far less tough than the Azure and larger than the PAM. Compared to the other two, its range was far greater. As he completed entering the data, he let the AI complete the design. He got back to his feet and started toward one of the break rooms. He took out his phone and led it to begin looking about the room. His phone indicated that this room had a new entry tunnel put into it. He extended it, allowing it to look about the room. Then he noticed that it was integrated into the floor. Reaching into his sleeve, he dropped his bag on the ground. He located the button and pressed it, bracing himself as polymer and metal slithered out and encircled him. In an instant, his exosuit connected to the tube, causing the floor to descend and reveal an elevator. As he climbed aboard it, Izuku remarked, very high-end. Nothing happened after the elevator floor clipped into his mechanical boots. Izuku was perplexed as he glanced about before hearing the metal moan. As the elevator rushed down, sparks streaming off of it from its sheer speed, he felt his heart leap into his throat. It then came to a halt. Izuku glanced around and saw that he was in the base. As his feet unclipped from the elevator floor, he whispered, holy shit. He went forward on unsteady legs, allowing the array of technology to welcome him. As his exosuit stabilized him, he remarked, gonna have to fix that later. As he passed through the lab, Izuku mumbled, okay, let's see what we got from those heists while I was away. As it approached him, an Ontier droid fed information into his helmet. He said, "You need more of those things." And the Ontier simply chirped back. The Ontier rolled away, and Izuku replied, "Put them on the list." He proceeded to the computer configuration, performing scans across the system. Nothing that would notify security, no activity on the edges. A new droid to help his brick and head models was already in Izuku's mind. Then he became aware of something. It was on the surface, right over the spot where he fried those things with his brick models. It hardly moved at all, just enough to register on the scanner. Izuku entered a command, and the computer and his helmet exchanged data. As he perused the data further, he mumbled, "No one has investigated it yet, might be a homeless person, but how long has it been here?" Discovering that the trigger had remained in the same spot for more than 6 days in a row. Izuku entered another command, and his issue models reciprocated. On the monitor, he saw the droids tunneling upward. He was able to see where the trigger was by switching displays. There was a tiny area, hardly big enough to fit a car, in between two enormous cargo warehouses. As the issues got closer, Izuku started to perspire. He turned to their built-in cameras and surveyed the scene. Well, it was one of those. It had a phrase printed on the front and was not very large. He had the issue approach slowly, reading the sign from a distance with their cameras. "Hello fellow villain, we have been trying to reach you. We know where you are and we are only giving you one chance to listen to our demands. You know where our lair is, so we won't tell you where to go. On the 14th at 12:05 p.m., we will be expecting you in person. Should you refuse our invitation for a meeting, then expect retaliation." Izuku loudly read the message and then looked at the display. He needed to be there in 3 days. He took one final glance at the cameras. Then he gave the order for his issues to back off. Uncertain if they had some other tracer on it or if that would be interpreted as a refuse, he didn't want to take the chance of frying the thing. He entered a second command, advancing the use of his most recent design. His R&Ds were already working on it, so he couldn't afford to wait. As parts and materials were shifted about, machinery came to life with legendary intensity. He couldn't afford to waste the 3 days he had left. Gazing through one of the Numis's artificial eyes, All for One brimmed with pride. His offer had been accepted by the inventor. He had the team of specialized Numis waiting for Garaki. He'll be here in just 2 days. He used his quirks to increase the lair's sensor's range. He was so excited that he wanted to take the new villain under his wing. Izuku left home once more with a groan. He left earlier than usual because today was the day. Because of his new relationships with UA, he was aware that heroes were closely monitoring him, as well as the cops. He was indifferent. In any case, they would not enter his storehouse. He walked over to the place's thick doors and entered. He wasted little time entering the day's directives, the tasks that the ICE and PAMs would complete during the day. What would be changed to comply with orders? What they should test for their upcoming prototype. He then headed for the tunnel. He waited for the break room door to close before turning on his exosuit. He held himself still as the elevator quickly banged straight to the lab. Then he walked over to his most recent prototype. In front of him was a big suit that was meant to attach to his exosuit. As Izuku walked up to the machine, it was higher than the head models and had a big screen for a face. Izuku cautiously climbed in as its chest opened, given that it was an experimental device. Izuku turned on the suit and it closed. Shockwave, the exosuit model, was now available online. Feeling the suit reflect it, Izuku flexed his fingers. He got to his feet, moving the suit with each stride. Izuku raised his right arm and looked at the weapon that was attached to it. Energy surged along the barrel, and the gun blazed. He turned and raised a leg, letting his arm rest. It felt like he was strolling about in his new exosuit as he marched. But if he was telling the truth, it was more of a mech suit than an exosuit. He went down the tunnel that was being excavated. A horde of head and brick models stood watch behind him. He was followed by 6 brick models and a single squadron under the command of a head model. Digging their way along the previously dug and buried tunnel, the issues had been occupied the entire time. Izuku braced himself in a sprinter's position as he felt a set of wheels drop from the mech's ankles. The squad trailed behind him as the suit sped ahead, covering ground. Before long, he came to the end of the tunnel. His scanners revealed another tunnel, this one divided by a few feet of stone and soil. He watched as the bricks cut through the dirt wall. A small group of animals stood on the other side of the tunnel, which opened up to reveal the debris. One came closer, its body displaying a built-in monitor. A warped picture of static appeared on the screen as it suddenly sprang to life. Hello, I am glad you decided to accept our invitation today. I know you're early, but I would prefer it as such. We have much to discuss, inventor. A voice on the monitor remarked. As Izuku moved forward, the voice went on, your droids will stay here, as will my Numu. This will be a meeting between you and I. Before typing a command, Izuku froze and started to perspire. If your Numu pass this line, my droids will prepare attack. Izuku said. The voice shot back, if your droids follow suit, then so will my Numu. Izuku only nodded as he proceeded. These, he had at last given them a name, Numus, as he had called them. The Numus moved back into position as he passed them, standing aside to allow him to pass. As the tunnel turned into a structure, Izuku grew tense. As he moved forward, he saw that the walls were lined with stagnant lights. Izuku opened a single door cautiously in front of him. The room was filled with the sound of medical equipment. The room was occupied by a single man who was connected to several pieces of equipment. The same voice from the monitor said, "Ah, so we meet in person, inventor." Izuku inquired through the mech's voice filter, "Indeed, what can I call you?" "You can call me All for one. Now we have much to talk about, inventor." A foe replied. The inventor asked, "Quirk Thief, do you want to hire me?" "Ah, so you know of my other moniker, inventor." A foe remarked with a smile. "One does not dive into history without discovering your legend, though story is more accurate considering what I am faced with." The inventor responded. "Aha, I knew you would be far more interesting than you appear to be." I replied, "You were one of the few alive who knows what life was like before quirks. There isn't much information on you, but it's there." The inventor said, "So, you're interesting in history before quirks," replied a foe. The inventor retorted sharply, "I wish to restore something that was lost." "You wish to restore the technology of old. What had been buried by both the Third World War and the rise of quirks? The great structures buried by conflict and time," I said cryptically. "Yes, you have something to offer in exchange for my services. The fact that you haven't attempted to hack into my suit yet shows that you wish for an exchange to occur." The inventor said. "That's right, the youngster has real talent. Older ice were far more powerful than technopathic quirks, despite their potency. The boy's abilities were demonstrated by the fact that he had already advanced to the point where his ice could stop his hacking quirks. You wish for a way to reach the technology of old. I have the locations to several places that can still hold such marvelous pieces. All you have to do help me in my organization. There will be quotas to fulfill. When each quota is reached I will give you these locations. Does that seem fair?" a foe asked the inventor. The inventor appeared to ponder what had been presented to him. The inventor guessed, "You need my machines, and my technology to help with your plans." "Yes, I do believe that you will see this as fair payment." A foe responded. The inventor hesitated once again. "Make me a list for each quota. I will fulfill them in exchange for the information. No double crosses. I don't kill people. I will rob locations and destroy property, but I don't kill." The inventor said. As another Numu walked up, a foe remarked, "Fair, it's so rare to see a villain with a code these days. It's quite refreshing to meet one who does." The inventor was able to read the tablet it held out. The inventor went back to him and nodded, saying, "I can make you these, just know that I'm an inventor, not a biologist." "I know, inventor. So, when can I expect my first shipment?" replied a foe. "Less than a week from now. It will take me time to gather the resources and construct what will be needed. I'll use the tunnel to deliver them to you." The inventor responded. "Understood, it's been a pleasure doing business with you." A foe replied. The inventor said, "Same to you," and got to his feet. A foe only observed the man leaving in his mech suit. As he leaned back, a foe thought, "Oh, what wonderful things he will do." After he was certain the inventor had left the room, a foe mumbled, "All for me, to bring the world under my rule." As Izuku made his way back to his side of the tunnel, his thoughts drifted to, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. He had just spoken with the Quirk Thief, the world's oldest man and the only living person who had witnessed the potential of the lost technology. He felt both awe-inspiring and scared. Izuku paled as he understood what he had agreed to. The high-fated as he examined the lists ago had left him. All he had to do to obtain that archaic tech was to sign away his soul to the devil. These were exosuits, construction tools, and robots, not quirk gear. He had only provided a foe all of this knowledge in order to find out where the intact remnants of the ancient world were located. As he crawled out of the lab, numb, he let the mech stop, deactivated it, and silently punched in an order for the R&Bs to get to work, setting the data and sending out his issues, bricks, and heads to start obtaining more resources. He simply ran the blueprints through the computer, allowing his AI to start creating plans and making adjustments while his automated facilities started producing what was required. I have to do this, he's too dangerous to just let me stick around as a neutral party. Izuku moaned as he looked back to his entours, the only ones who were unaffected by this change of direction. He entered another command and shook his head in response. He had a strong desire to return home and check on his mother and Eri. Izuku straightened his knees as the elevator stopped, stepped forward as his exosuit returned to its dormant state, took a deep breath, and looked around the room, realizing that he had 3 hours to get home. Izuku took a deep breath and struck the wall with his fist, saying, "Why did you do that? All of our hard work and morals, exchanged for a shortcut." He yelled. He continued. By now his fist was slamming into the wall, a crater forming around it. "You idiot," he yelled. Turning to face the room's mirror, he bemoaned, "One slip up, a meeting with the devil, and you sell your soul away. All our work, now latched onto a sinister evil far worse than ourselves. You fool, he gives you a hint and you just rolled over." Without concern, he struck the mirror with his fist, causing the glass to splinter and fall to the ground. "You fucking idiot," he yelled. He narrowed his eyes at the remnants of the mirror and gritted his teeth as agony set in as he pulled his hand back, causing blood to spill onto the floor. "You've doomed yourself, all for a short-sighted greed." A PAM rolled into the room with a medical kit in its claws after he took out his phone in his other hand and tapped a button. "Thank you," he said to the robot as it started to treat his wound. "You were very fortunate that he didn't discover your identity," he said, turning to face the broken remnants of the mirror. "We're glad he couldn't get past our AI." As the PAM concluded, Izuku told himself, "If you make a mistake again, we're toast." He took a deep breath to regain his composure before leaving to carry on with his legal duties. Nedzu winced as he read the report, which revealed that the moles, the new moniker the HSPC had given them, had buried at least 7 warehouses and support business facilities, all of which had been taken from them in the middle of the night. Japan lies beneath the terror. Every building was in a different district, buried at a different time of day, and the moles had become so blatant that they were now stealing things in broad daylight instead of under the moonlight, despite the HSPC's advice to step up their efforts to take them down. Witnesses were useless, always stranded on the ground with their muscles gripped by the moles' weapons, and each time they sent heroes after these fiends, they would already be gone. Excellent. Looking through the paperwork of the new employees he was about to hire, Nedzu bemoaned, "First the moles get worse, now we have a media break-in today." With the villains becoming more and more brazen every day, Nedzu needed as much manpower as possible. "How can Sergental and Labrava be recruited now?" he whispered. It had only been 4 days since their meeting, and the inventor was obviously a man of his word, as evidenced by the fact that the first quota was nearly finished. A foe grinned at the video of their trade-off. He laughed and said, "Tamura would hit the USJ today with All Might in attendance." He wasn't going to give Tamura any of the inventor's technology because he had already given him enough with the Numu and Kurogiri. He just needs to relax and listen to the news. Sincerely, he doesn't care whether they win or lose. If he wins, All Might is gone. If he loses, All Might is weakened. In either case, All Might suffers and UA is questioned. Dissent will begin to spread when society is upended. "What's our current estimation on the infusions?" A foe asked the doctor while tapping away at his tablet. "It will be hard right now," he said. "It will take some time to incorporate the inventor's high-end products into your life support system and Numu tanks." "Good to hear, the sooner I can move freely, the better." Garaki responded, "At the very least, his tech is tenfold increasing our security systems." Garaki said, "Yes my lord," and hung up. A foe grinned again, his mind conjuring up images of the past mixed with the future. Heroes defenseless against the old battleships and war machines. The JSDF defenseless as AI destroys their technology and hacks through their systems. Nedzu stranded in his own office, starving to death as his own safe house turns into a coffin. And All Might, with his body lying still on the ground and his head in his hands. A naive villain who longs for a change that society would never embrace has given him all this power. Izuku closed the last video as he looked at the clock, letting the footage of his azures at the USJ give him some sort of solace, the knowledge that he was still assisting people with his creations, not simply instilling fear in their hearts. He was about an hour away from having to go home. As PAMs rolled out the frames for his next invention, Izuku switched screens, transmitting the data to his local eyes so they could come up with ideas for how to make the Azures better. All right, let's see if I can finish this by tomorrow. As he put on a pair of gloves, he mumbled. The PAMs brought in wire and circuits while Izuku completed the assembly, taking each piece in his hand and fastening it together with bolts and screws. After 15 minutes, Izuku leaned back, took off his gloves, and gazed at his handiwork. It rolled around on 4 airless tires instead of treads, slightly taller than the PAMs around it, and when it activated, it rolled in his direction and examined him with its screen face, which included a pair of basic eyes and mouth. Hello, I'm Unit 01, how may I be of assistance today? Please put me in inspection mode, Izuku said, holding up his damaged hand as the droid asked. He inquired. Hand wound caused by glass shards, the wound has been cleaned and bandaged prior to inspection, the droid said, examining the hand with a slight glow emanating from its screen. To prevent infection when applying this cream to the region, it is advised to clean and replace the bandages once daily. The droid made this suggestion when a picture of Vaseline showed on its screen. As 2 PAM units carried the droid to the shelves, Izuku whispered, "Thank you, dismissed." Understood. Please have a wonderful day. The droid replied before shutting down. Eri will love this. Izuku grinned and wrote something else into the computer before getting up and saying, might as well head home now. He looked at the time and saw that it was 30 minutes before he had to leave for home. As Izuku led them to the warehouse, Eri held Inko's hand, her plush bunny still in her grasp, her head shielded by a big sun hat, and Mochi, much to Eri's dismay, was forced to stay at home. Izuku opened the doors and allowed the PAMs inside to drive his mother and sister. Before they reached the main room, he warned, "We're almost there, just be cautious of your ears." 2 PAMs arrived carrying a sizable object that was covered by a tarp. "Mom, Eri, I want you two to name him," Izuku said as the PAMs took off the tarp. Eri gazed up at the machine curiously as the droid slowly approached them, a tiny smiley face visible on its screen. "What is he meant for?" In response to Inko's question, Izuku said, "I am currently known as Unit 01. He's a medical bot designed to aid doctors, nurses, and ambulance crews." The droid added, "He's able to speak." "Yes, he's supposed to soothe and help his patients," Inko said. Izuku replied, "It's also to make sure that kids can trust me." The droid added. Eri glanced up at him and walked slowly toward him. The droid's eyes moved downward. "Hello there, what do you need? Is it okay if I call you Teddy?" The droid said. Eri inquired, and the now-named Teddy answered, "Of course, I am now Teddy Unit 01. Izuku grinned as they watched Teddy scan Eri, explaining to Inko that each unit is designed to accept a name from its owner. The name is meant to give them personality. Inko remarked, "Oh Izu, they'll love him. Among many other things, you are recuperating from malnourishment and trauma. For the optimal recovery, the current diagnostic advises continuing the current course of treatment." As Eri inquired about her well-being, Teddy answered, "I hope you have a good day." Teddy then took a lollipop from its torso and gave it to Eri. Inko cocked an eyebrow at Izuku and stated, "That's a subroutine for children's hospitals and elementary schools." Izuku said to his mother, "It can be added for other patients as well." Izuku grinned as Eri approached them with the reward in her lips, and Izuku grabbed her up while she gave him a tight hug. "Where are you selling these ones first?" Inko simply nodded as Eri accepted the provided treat. Inko inquired, "Well, naturally, children's hospitals," Izuku replied. Izuku felt proud when Inko joined in the embrace, reminding him that he was a good guy who merely wanted to serve the world and not some evil villain. Izuku took a deep breath as the elevator descended, slowly acclimating to the fact that today was the last day of his shipments to All for One, and he had one last task to complete. His R&Bs had been working diligently to ensure that the failsafe was still operational. Izuku tested every item today. He used his gauntlet to activate the failsafe and watched as electricity passed through the entire system before it exploded. He then moved on to the next batch to make sure that each could be turned off at any time. Having something like that helped him feel better, even though he wasn't sure if it would halt All for One. He turned to the machine as one of his Ontier units walked up to him, sending him more data through his helmet. "I see," he said, "so Project Cell has been halted owing to lack of biomatter. What about raw meat? I can't just have another Numu." Izuku wondered, weighing his options. have the nanites taken up residence? I see, keep at it, he said to the engineer, who only beeped in answer. As data flashed over his screen once more, Izuku remarked, we'll find a new source of biomatter soon enough. Izuku mumbled, I made this mistake, now I have to fix it. A phone call rang across the office, and Nedzu, full of thoughts, paused as he picked it up and realized it was young Midoriya's number. Hello, Nedzu, I have a new machine to unveil and I think he inquired. It would be beneficial to have some of them on site, Midoriya said. That's fantastic, really, have you looked over the video that we supplied you? Yes, we already have upgrades in mind for the Azure models thanks to the footage, Nedzu said, turning on one of his programs. By the way, I'm so grateful for it, Midoriya said. That's good to hear, could you tell me which machines you sell to the United Arab Emirates? Medical droids, designed with adaptive AI, Nedzu inquired. Nedzu hid a frown as his program failed to hack the young man's phone, but Midoriya responded, excellent, I know that Recovery Girl has been hounding me to get her more staff. Midoriya laughed, and Nedzu joked, doctors are in short supply Nedzu, everyone needs them, not everyone can afford them. When can I anticipate receiving them? Nedzu inquired, I'll send a sheet in 3 days so Recovery Girl is aware of their capabilities prior to their arrival. How much will this cost me? Midoriya questioned. As he hung up, Nedzu added, well then, I hope you have a good day Midoriya. No cost, these are donations. Nedzu questioned. In other news, the Bay model medical droid, Midoriya Izuku's most recent invention, is causing a stir today. Tamura frowned as he listened to the news reporter say, he has donated these models to children's hospitals all across Japan, even donating some to regular hospitals and schools. He considered hurling the remote control at the television to turn it off. As the TV resumed its tirade, he moaned and turned it off, saying to the hazy butler, Kurogiri, put that name on the murder list. Which, the inventor or the news anchor? Tamura responds, both, one annoys me and the other infuriates me. Kurogiri inquired. Kurogiri remarked, young master, today is the day. Tamura, holding out a small handheld console, added, I know, we have a few hours to burn until we get to start it. How much fodder do we have? As he tinkered with the controls, Tamura inquired, about 200 lower-ranking villains. Kurogiri replied, how many major hitters? 40 gang enforcers and muscle for hire, alongside yourself, I, and Master's gift, Kurogiri remarked coolly as Tamura stared up at the mist man. All right, what was the estimated number of pupils attending? Only 20 or so, along with 3 staff members, including All Might, inquired Tamura. Has the muscle been deployed? Kurogiri said. Tamura inquired. Yes, Kurogiri estimated that All Might should only have 20 minutes remaining by the time the USJ starts. Kurogiri fought the desire to roll his eyes at the young master's demeanor, saying, as you command young master. Tamura guessed the plan. Excellent, then all we have to do is kill some kids, sick the Numu against All Might, then win. Izuku was hard at work. All for One had provided him with a location of one of the few intact labs, the Sapia Laboratory, which was buried beneath layers of stone, metal, and dirt beneath Tokyo. According to his information network, the lab was a leading torch in pioneering healthcare and improvements on the human form, as well as a leading edge in biology and cybernetics research. Izuku only needed to get started. His issues were working diligently, searching beneath Tokyo with their scanners for the lab. Izuku could be patient, but he had no idea how long it would take. Therefore, he was busy creating more medical droids while his villain self was engaged in that activity. Izuku had to shift his present resources to producing more of these devices because the sheer volume of orders for them exceeded both his PAM and Azure orders. As he guided them from his computer, machinery hummed in the background. You seem to be experiencing high levels of stress. Teddy said, it might be best to take a little break and listen to some relaxing music. Izuku glanced at him and then back at his computer, checking the time on his phone and muttering, 5 minutes, I can spare 5 minutes, before getting up. Running his hands through his hair, Izuku walked to the center of the room and said, I should have waited until I had made more of you. He looked at Teddy and said, it's okay, I don't think anyone could have considered how popular we would be. Izuku paused, then turned to face Teddy and said, I don't remember activating you. You didn't. My automatic scanner picked up your elevated stress levels and heightened exhaustion and had me start up automatically. Teddy responded, yeah, it's pretty unexpected. Izuku gazed at his invention and added, I'll make a note of that, Can't have any of your brothers giving people heart attacks by suddenly turning on. The 5 minutes had already passed when Izuku looked back at his phone. Back to work, Teddy returned to inactive mode. Izuku ordered, and Teddy said, "Yes sir," before shutting down. Izuku went back to his seat and continued typing orders as data was transmitted through. Nedzu sighed as All Might, in his diminutive form, appeared before him. "Yagi, do you know why I asked to speak with you? Does it have to do with how I use my time?" Nedzu inquired. "Yes, you have to be more responsible, we can't have you losing time for every random crime you come across," Nedzu said Yagi after he nodded in response to Yagi's question. Then a phone call stopped Nedzu, who looked down and raised an eyebrow at the caller, saying, "There are other heroes in the city Yagi, let them, a friend of yours." Before answering, Nedzu said, "An associate, who doesn't call very often?" Yagi queried. "Something just came up, Nedzu." Nedzu arched an eyebrow, then went to his computer and pulled up something. "I can't get any readings from the Azures at the USJ." Midoriya's voice reverberated from Nedzu's phone. "There's a problem at the USJ. I can't get them either," he says. Before Yagi left the room, Nedzu said, "We will continue this talk later. Thank you for the warning, young Midoriya, you may have saved lives today. I'm just the guy who gave you those, you don't have to flatter me." Yagi asked. "Perhaps, I'll alert the staff, you hurry along," Nedzu ordered. Yagi nodded before changing. Before hitting a staff emergency button, Nedzu simply grinned and muttered, "You're so much more, young man." Here we are, outside the renowned USJ training area of UA, the scene of a horrific villain attack earlier today. Before a gang of villains struck, one of UA's hero classes thought today would be unique and an opportunity to practice search and rescue. Fortunately, the UA, before any students were hurt, the staff was able to repel the villains. But there are still a lot of unanswered questions. These villains are who? They attacked the UA, but why? The reporter continued to babble when Izuku interrupted the broadcast and utilized the computer to enlarge a portion of the photograph while noting the villains' arrest. One of them was a big, strong Numu. Izuku gritted his teeth as he switched the perspective to another news show, looking at the image of the Azures he had sold to UA. One was only junk, another was half destroyed, and the third had lost limbs and armor. He had used his civilian identity to aid against All for One. He saluted his machines briefly before his phone rang, and when he looked at it, he saw that it was Nedzu. "Yes, thanks to you, young Midoriya, we were able to protect a number of students from possible harm today," he replied. Izuku responded, "Yes, but if I may bother you for a moment, I must apologize for the state of your robots." Nedzu added, "It's understandable, I made the Azures with a subroutine to prioritize protecting civilians in case a villain attacked, and they did their job." Nedzu inquired. "What is it?" Izuku asked. "It's been a while since I've wanted to meet you in person." Nedzu remarked, "I think this incident has merely demonstrated how unstable society is becoming." Izuku nodded, "I'll give it some thought. After all of this, Izuku still needs to send you some replacement Azures." "Ah, replacements. How about the Azures?" Nedzu began. "I can access their scanners through a backdoor. Its purpose is to alert me if there is a malfunction or bug in their programming that causes issues." "I see, and I think my students want to send you a thank you present for your aid, especially for the assistance your medical droids lent them," Nedzu stated. "I sent you the call when they all went dark without any kind of damage or shutdown," Izuku added. "Well, have them put it in your office and let them know the day I'll be there." Izuku said, "We can talk more there." Nedzu said, "Good to know, young Midoriya, I look forward to our talk." Izuku said, "Have a good day, Nedzu." Nedzu then hung up. Izuku slumped back and said, "Just have to balance it out. Nedzu wants to speak with a foe, but he hasn't sent him any demands, whether they are concerning the Numu from the USJ or the other villains who were captured. This may be a straightforward information exchange or another required attempt." Looking back to his phone, Izuku typed a command and saw a simulation of the Earth beneath Tokyo, down beneath the subway lines and sewers, beneath old bunkers and war tunnels, where his issues had discovered a solitary collapsed tunnel that led far below the surface and was formerly connected to the surface. The Sapia laboratory was closer than ever, thus this had to be the lab. He would have a piece of ancient technology in his hands and start building a tunnel and sending in investigation drones as soon as he had a definite location. It wasn't like the masterpieces of the past that he had created with his own hands. Just a bit more time. One prisoner, The Numu was in a lone van that was traveling down the highway with police escorts on either side of it. The officers in front of the van maintained a constant gaze, alert for any unusual action up ahead. As the van turned sharply, the officers in it maintained their weapons at the ready, and the beast strapped inside stayed unmoving, its eyes unblinking as it stared at them. It then came to a halt. The roadway ahead was ripped apart, rebar and concrete revealed, automobiles stopped before the remnants of the road could even hurt them, and the lead officers emerged with radios and pistols ready. The windows then blew up. As the windows of every car exploded, officers sought shelter, some hid behind their doors, while others attempted to call for help. But they were unable to see their assailants. Then the road shook, and people scattered, some looking down, and then they heard a terrible ringing in their ears, making officers double over in agony as the Numu began to tremble. Something came closer. As it ripped open the van door, officers could only see its shadow. Then, as the shadow vanished, they smelled the acrid scent of ozone. They discovered something unsettling as they got to their feet. The entire Numu had been fried, its body reduced to a charred carcass. Something had just slain a creature that could have fought All Might. Backup officers began to arrive when officers called in, but it was too late, they never even saw anything. He wanted Izuku to take care of the Numu, and his entours needed additional pieces, so he felt they could both profit. However, it turns out that a foe was mistaken about his request, and it only happened later than he had anticipated. Izuku looked down at his computer. Even when Izuku asked a foe what to do, he responded, "Kill it, steal it, it doesn't matter." A foe didn't seem to care about the Numu. Izuku shuddered at the response, "I have more than enough." Therefore, he sent his most recent machine against it. The Echo model was shorter than the heads but taller than the bricks, with a single pair of legs and a variety of weapon arms that could be switched out for different missions. It was also thinner than the brick models and had a more humanoid form. Izuku had equipped it for this mission with the recently created sonic echo chambers integrated into the chest of each Echo model, along with a stress-tested hydraulic claw for the other arm and the mass shock gauntlet he made standard issue for his robots. The officers were left crippled as the Echo successfully took care of the Numu, and it's safe to say the test was successful. They didn't even realize they were trapped in it until their windows burst. A foe even complimented him on the mission's cleanliness. That only made him feel conflicted. However, his entours had more biomatter to work with, his issue units were drawing nearer to the Sapia laboratory, and the rest of his men were busy meeting quotas and plundering additional locations. The cops now have a dead Numu and a self-replicating chunk of biomatter since he had the Echo do something really repulsive, namely remove the Numu's head and spine and then use its shock gauntlets to trigger its regeneration. Although it made him sick, he had to take action for Project Cell. That blunder with Teddy a few days ago made him suspicious of some of his other creations, so hopefully it will keep the entours happy. He had modeled the Bay units on the entour units when creating their AI, so who knows what they might be working on. The mole will have an easier time because the cops will either be after him or they will be searching for a new, non-existent criminal. Nedzu hummed as he reclined in his chair, the whole room black, almost invisible save for the light over his head, and he considered bringing a cat to finish the ensemble, but he's better than that. His attention was drawn to the sound of someone jumping in from the sun roof, with another person following shortly after. Nedzu calmly said, "So, you agreed to my message, Gentle." Gentle criminal moved closer, La Brava following closely after. "Of course I did, your offer intrigued me," Gentle said, placing his palm to his chin. "The pay is pretty great too," La Brava added. "Yes, have you two considered creating a false identity to prevent the HSPC from attempting to shut us down?" "Good, the sooner we get your hero identities filled in, the sooner you two can start teaching at UA." Nedzu asked. "We're still working on that, but I was thinking something along the lines of the gentleman." Gentle responded, "And I would be the Duchess," La Brava added. "With the new curricula, I have no doubt that the students will thrive," Nedzu remarked. Gentle answered, "Yes, I am excited to contribute to the development of tomorrow's minds with a gentleman's spirit." Nedzu replied, "That's great, let's move on to other matters." "You would like us to visit Midoriya's warehouse?" La Brava inquired. "Yes, heroes are allowed to monitor the compound's exterior, but none of them have inside. I want the two of you to record the interior of the establishment. Just shoot within it, no bugs, no trackers, maybe even interview him," Nedzu added. "Would he permit such a thing?" "It's only a possibility," said Gentle. "If he doesn't want an interview, that would be fine." Nedzu answered. Yes, we will we? Gentle replied as he turned to face Labrava, who nodded. Oh, before you go. Nedzu added as Gentle turned to face him. Gentle caught a thrown bag with ease, took a wary glance inside, and grinned. Ah, from the Indian markets? Gentle asked, and Nedzu nodded in agreement. Yes, aged for decades. Before the lights went out, Nedzu jokingly said, Good day, 007, good day. He observed as they left in the same manner that they had arrived. As he watched the data pass by the screen, Izuku exhaled with ease. Up until now, his backdoors had shown little problems with the Bay models, and he was even receiving positive feedback from each customer. Now, what would he make next? What would be his next source of inspiration? The PAMs were inspired by his desire to help his mother, the Azure from the tragic event that destroyed the old apartment, and the Bay from his desire to aid Eri in his recovery. His villain persona had to worry about everything, not just weapons and droids. What would motivate him to produce his next work? A knock on the door roused Izuku from his musing, and he closed the tab and switched to a security camera, noticing a short woman and an older, well-dressed guy standing outside the door. He took out a microphone and grumbled, switching tabs to another area of the camera. Yes, what do you need? Ah, young man, my associate and I would like to interview you on behalf of UA, he said, looking up to get Izuku a better view of his face. You can call me gentleman, Duchess, my partner, the man added. Do you have evidence? Izuku inquired. The man appeared to consider for a moment before taking out his phone and sending a text message. After a few interval of waiting, Izuku's phone buzzed and he got a text from Nedzu. All right, he verified you. Before getting up, Izuku said into the microphone, let's get this done with. He walked to the door, took a quick look into the break room, and shook his head before opening it and admitting the two of them in. He and Duchess passed him, and the gentleman remarked, thank you young guy. Come on, the nicest spot I have is in the main office. Izuku led them there, saying, so, this is all yours. As she surveyed the area, Duchess inquired, yes, Izuku was able to purchase this property and convert it into my workshop because of a group of investors. As the gentleman leaned on the desk and Duchess produced a camera, they paused in the office, and Izuku turned off the screens and sat down in his chair. Just going to say, I'm glad you aren't actually trying to rob me, Gentle. Izuku said. How? A skilled but short woman joined an older man with sophisticated taste in attire, the gentleman inquired. Ah, well the name is a bit on the nose. You guys are the only villains I would even let close to the warehouse. Well, let's put that behind us, we'll be working at UA. Also known as Gentle Criminal and Labrava, if Nedzu hadn't sent me that text I wouldn't have let you in. Izuku clarified. Izuku responded, I agree, I have work to do. Duchess turned on the camera. It's soon, and I would like this interview to begin. Gentle stated. Hello everyone, I'm the gentleman, a new hero. My colleague, the Duchess, and I are here to speak with a young man who is causing a stir in the country. Izuku waved courteously as the gentlemen introduced themselves. Now, I'm sure everyone wants to know just why you've constructed these machines. Why are you so eager to sell them to others and why have you been taking such risks? Gentle inquired. Izuku inhaled deeply. Well, the reasons I constructed them. Can you elaborate? He began. The truth is that I made these machines to help people. Gentle inquired. Yes, Izuku replied before taking out his phone, and shortly after, a PAM unit pulled up. As you can see here, the PAM unit was the first thing I built, he remarked. My mother served as my inspiration for the PAM. She reared me alone and was very hard on herself. I wanted to help people who are struggling in their lives and to give back to her. Izuku paused after saying, PAM also stands for Personal Assistance Machine. It's not the most inventive, but it makes the point. The idea that you constructed such a contraption merely to assist your mother is the most amazing thing, young man. Your mother must be very proud of you, said Gentle, complimenting him, because she was the only person who showed concern for me for the majority of my life. As Duchess brushed her eyes with a tissue, Gentle remarked, what a kind soul. Yes, now onto my next machine. Izuku replied as the PAM drove away. So I felt it more than necessary to pay her back. Next up is the Azure, also known as the Autonomous Search, Rescue, and Recovery Unit, or ASRR. Izuku paused and continued, it's okay, young man, take all the time you need. Sometime before I had introduced the PAM, I had a beta model built in our tiny apartment. This is a bit more tragic than the first one. The apartment building collapsed one night as a result of a nasty fight. I had the beta PAM assist in removing people from the area as it collapsed, but the hero continued to battle. As the battle went on, the beta was ultimately defeated. Izuku paused and inhaled deeply. My building wasn't the last one brought down by that fight, and ours was the only one that didn't have any casualties. I was inspired to design the Azure model by my memories of that evening. Izuku concluded, to help save people from damage and calamity. Do you dislike the hero who brought it about? Izuku responded, I see, and the medical droids. Gentle inquired, hate is a strong word, but I do hold him in disdain for his sheer neglect and recklessness. Gentle inquired. The Bay models, huh? It's a lengthy tale about a young sister who is terrified of everything. I created the Bay models to aid in healing and provide support during difficult times. The fact that you can give them names is one of their nicest features. The girl who inspired their creation gave the one I have here the name Teddy. Izuku remarked, he's been a pretty good help to keep me from overworking myself. So, each and every one of your devices was created with the intention of assisting others, motivated by your personal experiences and the people who have influenced your life. Duchess nods and hands over a tissue. Gentle clarified, yes, I hope that my machines can continue to help people, even after I pass on. Izuku replied, such a noble goal, it almost brings me to tears. Are there any further inquiries? As Duchess nodded, Izuku added, there is one. What do you think of the villain that people are referring to as the mole? What do I think of him? Gentle inquired. Izuku paused and put a hand to his chin. Izuku whispered, I'm trying to demonstrate how technology can benefit the world, and I hate him. But he only uses it to harm people and steal. Izuku replied earnestly, yes, he is quite unkind in his work. I hope that the heroes can put a stop to him, before he drags the names of inventors through the mud more than he already has. Is this it? As Duchess switched off the camera, Izuku said, I think so, we don't have any more questions that would be answered without you repeating yourself. Gentle nodded, I see, then have a good day sir. Izuku got to his feet as Gentle extended his hand. As Gentle nodded, Izuku shook it and added, I wish you luck on your next creation. Gentle then started to leave, and Duchess followed him, nodding quietly before she went. Izuku waved them out, and as he heard the door open and close, he mumbled, thank Kami that's all over. Izuku sensed his sister's and mother's firm grip. The two had embraced him tightly and had not released him. His interview's video had been posted to HeroTube and was quickly gaining popularity. Even his investors applauded him for gaining the public's sympathies. What a notion. However, there was significant criticism because they had left it entirely unaltered. Whether it was threatening Inko and Eri or blackmailing him for disparaging a hero, the HSPC would be taking action shortly. He had investors at Dinerit and UA, so he needed to exercise caution, supporting him, while the government fully supported the HSPC. A local hero breaking down the door and choosing to take him in on false pretenses wouldn't surprise him. He was happy to have his family by his side for the time being, though. Nedzu opened the email from the HSPC and scowled. They threatened to stop paying him if he didn't stop working with Midoriya. It made sense. The boys' overt criticism of a hero's careless behavior was beginning to make them perceive him as a threat. They were even more resentful because they were unable to purchase the youngster because of his independent support. He was unfazed, though. He was supposed to meet with Midoriya today. The possibility of him joining as a student had been eliminated, but he had other choices. He could have Midoriya sign a couple of contracts. Basic things. Changes to his network security, new robot designs, and so forth. Due to the boisterous conduct of the teachers and kids, the recovery girl was already pressuring him to buy more of these Bay models. He also intended to have Azures at the USJ and gyms, some PAM models to serve as janitors, and Bay models available in the nurse's office and the aforementioned gyms. He still has more than enough money from his independent organizations and stock assets to get by even if the HSPC cuts off his support. Izuku strolled along the road. He pulled his hair into a sports cap and held a luggage. He had to exercise caution when he met with Nedzu today. To ensure it was tight, he pulled on the mask that covered the lower portion of his face. A disguise was necessary because he couldn't leave the house without being barraged with inquiries. It was effective. Not many people paid attention to him, and those who did didn't know who he was. He was aware that a UA. He didn't want to take a chance, even though Hiro was not far away. Feeling the pepper spray in his jeans pocket, Izuku placed his other hand there. His briefcase served only as a prop to attract attention to itself. Everything would be jeopardized if he simply walked around with his villain tech. Feathers fell in front of Izuku's path, causing him to pause and crane his head upward. There was no shadow in front of him, no bird in sight above him. His hand slipped around the pepper spray, ready to grab it at any time. He keeps on strolling while periodically looking up at the sky. Perhaps he ought to get a taser. He kept walking until he reached UA, which was only a few blocks away, when he heard someone land nearby. Izuku turned around and saw Hawks, the current number 3 hero, standing in front of him. He forced a self-assured smile on his face and swiftly pushed his wings behind his back. With some bluntness, Hawks added, "Howdy sir, my bosses want to meet with you." Izuku pretended to be stupid and inquired, "What's the meeting about?" Instead of responding, Hawks grabbed Izuku by the shoulder and pulled him into the closest alley. Hawks took out his phone as Izuku got his pepper spray ready. He knew who the caller was, but he didn't let Izuku see their ID. Before putting the device in speaker mode, Hawks said, "Hello, yes ma'am, I'm talking with him right now." "Midoriya Izuku I presume?" asked the HSPC president. Izuku questioned, "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Oh young man, your inventions are quite interesting. I was meaning to extend an offer of services to you, perhaps even give you a job in our organization." The president of the HSPC started. "If you want my services you can purchase them like everyone else." Izuku responds. Now, young man. Let's not be hasty. Making a decision that quickly can have some dire consequences. The lady said, "I don't take threats idly. I'm an independent. You can buy my machines, even make a custom order, but I work for no one." Izuku responded with a grimace. "That may he, but someone like yourself is far too young for this, you could use some guidance, no?" She asked. "Are you going to make an order or are you going to continue this failure of a kidnapping?" Izuku asks. She answered, "Oh kidnapping, I would never." Izuku sensed that she was being sarcastic. Izuku turned to go, saying, "I have an important meeting to get to, should I be late then my fellows will be investigating why. So good day." Before Hawks hung up, he heard the president of the HSPC remark, "Don't lose your head, young man." With haste, Izuku took out his own phone and texted Nedzu. "HSPC came by, tried to recruit me, left with a threat to take my head. I will be late for the meeting by a few minutes," the message was sent. Izuku doubled his pace and heard Hawks fly up. Putting down the dummy briefcase, Izuku entered Nedzu's office and sat down. Nedzu said, "I got your text, should I double your watch?" "Maybe, if they try anything with my family it will mean war." Izuku replied. "And yourself?" inquired Nedzu. "I'll make it, they can't make a place that could hold me." Izuku laughed. Nedzu only glared at him. Izuku shifted into a serious expression and leaned back. "I know what it means Nedzu, I can't stop now. Still, I must thank you for all the help you've given me." Izuku replied. "Indeed, I knew uploading that video to HeroTube would put your brand out." Nedzu replied. Izuku said, "Yeah, so you got a pair of villains teaching." "Correct, Gentle and I had been forming an agreement over the past year or so. He and his assistant Labrava go and work at UA in exchange for clearance for all prior crimes." Nedzu replied. The commission, LL get a kick out of that." Izuku replied. Nedzu brought out a number of contracts and remarked, "Now, on to proper business." He gave them to Izuku one by one so he could read them all. As he examined the final one, Izuku remarked, "High-end, could take me months to finish some of these, even if I reduce the rest of my facility's output. You don't have to complete all of them, I'm giving you a choice of contract to work with for UA." Nedzu elaborated. Izuku picked out 2 of the contracts and stated, "I see, then I believe my work with robotics and cybersecurity would be best. I remember watching that video and seeing your production line, you had modified PAMs working the lines, I would like some of those. As well as a few more Azure and Bay models for obvious reasons." Nedzu provided. Izuku said, "Can you get me exact numbers? Get me at least 16 of those modified production PAMs, 8 normal PAM units, 5 new Azure units, and 3 more Bay units seems like a good starting number." Nedzu said, "The others will be no problem, but those production PAMs are custom-made for my workshop. The best I could do would be to get you a guide to modifying the PAMs yourself as well as 16 extra PAMs. Izuku clarified. Nedzu said, understandable, what's the price? Before displaying the screen to Nedzu, Izuku just crunched the number on his phone. According to Izuku, about this much. Nedzu pulled out his own phone and answered, no problem. This will save money in the long run. As soon as Izuku received his pay notification, he transmitted the order to the warehouse AI. Nedzu said, now, I've noticed you have some AI on the side. They're still experimental, anything too complex will leave them wrecked, but I think I can make you some for you, Asake. Izuku responded. Nedzu said, good, how many and how much? As he ran the numbers once again, Izuku trailed off, 3 AI, similar in power to the ones I have running the warehouse in my absence, but more purpose-built than all around. Each costing about this much, he said as he demonstrated the cost to Nedzu. Nedzu asked, far more than my previous order. It takes a lot of time to make a single AI, if anything goes wrong then I have to start again. That price is for all 3 when they're finished. Though it will take at least a month and a half to finish, if I don't bring any of the other AI into the process. Izuku murmured the final sentence as he took cell phone. Nedzu said, I see, will I have to pay up front for them? No, these will be paid half up front, half when they're finished. Izuku responded. Nedzu let his phone cover the initial expense and remarked, good, now on to other business. There's more, asked Izuku. Yes, a good friend of mine would like to meet you. You may have heard of him before. Nedzu said. Izuku inquired, is it David Shield? Yes, he sent me an email requesting a meeting with you. Complete with a set of tickets to Island. Nedzu replied. Izuku blinked, pondering what he had been told for a while. Izuku asked, David Shield wants to meet with me. Yes, some of your machines had been purchased by Island and the head of research wants to meet with you. Nedzu clarified. Izuku inquired, when and for how long? About a week, and the time is just after the UA Sports Festival, replied Nedzu. When it happened, Izuku scowled. I see, is it a public plane or a private UA jet? Considering the HSPC has tried to recruit you, I'd rather you stay with trusted security. Nedzu replied, I'll check with my family, see if we can get a week off for the trip. Izuku replied, good to know, message me the results, now I believe that's the end of our meeting. Nedzu said. Izuku got up and remarked, yes, it's a pleasure doing business with you. Nedzu said, would you like a private ride? Izuku replied, I believe I would. Nedzu took out his phone and dialed one of his employees. Izuku left with them shortly after, and one of the employees came in. While lying on the couch, Izuku muttered, what I would do with UA, a budget. He was tired from the day, so he was happy to let Eri pick out a movie and watch it with her. He was still awake, but she had fallen asleep by now. He had already shared the proposal with Eri and Inko. While she was still worried about Eri, Inko was thrilled about a vacation and proud for him. Izuku was too. He wouldn't leave it to chance, even though her identity was hidden. Nevertheless, they agreed to it and were prepared to begin packing tomorrow. As the credits rolled, Izuku's gaze narrowed. He whispered softly, note to self, set up demolition charges underneath HSPC headquarters when I next visit the lab. He was lounging by his sister, an antagonist who has joined forces with All for One, an inventor supporting the UA and civilians. High school, a potential HSPC target. It is quite challenging to balance so many lives. Izuku sighed as he reclined on his chair. Even with some recent modifications to his warehouse's manufacturing line, it was still challenging to fulfill UA's order. Another aspect of it was juggling the production figures from it with the other orders that continued to come in each day. Better left unsaid was the creation of the AIs. Building his villain lab and sinking factories were easier tasks for him than handling all of this. He wasn't deterred, though. He was going to complete an order for a customer. For this, he had to put some of his next projects on hold, but it will be worthwhile. Despite his distaste for heroics, being in UA's good graces would help him stay afloat in the event that his investors suffered a setback. His phone then rang. As Izuku took it out, he saw a rush of data pour into the device. Then he grinned, a grin that bordered on savagery. The Sapia laboratory had been discovered by the issues. The impulse to get out of his chair had to be suppressed. He still had work to complete, so it would be at least an hour and a half before his villain hours began. Nevertheless, a fire was sparked in his eyes, and he grinned. He began typing code while leaning back at his workstation, moving his already existing AI to support him while he intensified his efforts to develop one of 3 artificial intelligences. He had time to kill because it would be some time before he could enter the Sapia laboratory for UA. For the first time in years, All for One exhaled steadily via his own lungs. As Garaki completed the installation of the life support systems in the freshly constructed exosuit, he moved slowly. A foe was compelled to call it the Devil's Armor, even though the inventor hadn't given it a name. He took another step and flexed his fingers around the metal frame. He was out of that godforsaken chair for the first time in years. The components of the garment attached to his neck allowed him to breathe out of his lips. The external sensors on the headpiece of the suit allowed him to see. Without any quirks, just armor and a weapon, his body seemed stronger than it had in its earliest days. The suit hummed pleasantly as a foe stretched his arms. "Garaki?" a foe asked as the commotion persisted. Garaki searched through his laptop and replied, "Finer calibrations, the suit is functioning solely on your own movement, sir." Before using his technopathy quirks to relieve the strain on the suit, a foe said, "I see." Garaki inquired, "How do you feel, my lord?" A foe smiled and said, "Like I just stepped out of a room full of dead heroes." Garaki mumbled, "Good, seems that everything is in working order then." With another flex of his fingers, a foe declared, "In fact, our new inventor has been very helpful." Garaki said, "Sir, would you like to test quirk compatibility?" "No, I just got this armor, I don't want it destroyed in an instant," replied a foe. According to Garaki, "I see, should we visit your student and butler?" "I shall do so on my own." "You are dismissed, Garaki," a foe replied. After grabbing his laptop and heading out, Garaki stated, "Call me if anything goes wrong." A foe mumbled, I will. He then rummaged through his quirks. As he twisted toward the bar, a dark ichor escaped his lips. It was closed to regular customers because it was daytime. It was enough to stun Kurogiri, who was now busy washing glasses, to see his lord seem unrestrained. There was no sign of Tamura, who was probably playing video games and pouting in his room. Kurogiri said, "My lord, how do you feel?" A foe answered, "Like I just killed Nana Shimura again." Kurogiri stepped forward to observe his master. Kurogiri inquired, "Has young master been informed of this?" A foe answered, "Not yet, I want to surprise him." Kurogiri saw his master slowly flex his arms and just nodded. Kurogiri said, "The armor suits you quite well, my lord." A foe gave him a quick smile. "Of course it does, it may have been over 200 years since I've last worn a piece like this, but my body never forgot the feeling," replied a foe. "All I need is a rifle capable of throwing lead at Mach 40 in semi-automatic fire, then it'll be complete." A foe laughed. They heard footsteps and realized that Tamura was coming. A foe relaxed as she turned toward the sound. A pale-faced Tamura emerged from one of the back doors. He came to a halt, his expression changing to one of astonishment and wonder. Master, he exclaimed, startled. A foe replies, "In the flesh." With strange shock, Tamura questioned, "How?" A foe flexed his hand and replied, "Technology, granted to me by a powerful new ally." Tamura said, Is there more?" Tamura appeared to suffer as a foe remarked, "Not too much more, most of it is in warehouses. There aren't any more exosuits those." A foe paused as he grasped Tamura's head and moved it forward. "This suit is necessary for me, all of my life support is built into it. It will take time before I am ready to strike. Tamura, look at me." Before releasing Tamura's head, a foe cautioned his student, "It is difficult for me to use many of my quirks while in this suit, Tamura. Your quirk would be useless with such a suit. There will be armor for you, but it has not yet arrived." Tamura started to scratch his neck and murmured, "Yes, master." "Calm yourself, Tamura, we have time to prepare before we next strike," a foe said to him. Tamura lowered his arms to his sides and said, "Understood." A foe looked down at his pupil and said, "Good, now tell me, what is your next plan?" Data flew past Izuku's helmet display. His hands were occupied with entering commands into his computer. The issues started exploring the area while his R&Bs were busy digging a tunnel to the Sapia laboratory. Izuku looked down at his newest machine as he turned his head. This droid was made purely for investigating the laboratories, it had no evil intent. Long and flat, the drone had a strong omnidirectional camera on its front and was coated in overlapping armor plates. The Centipede drone was this. Although it conflicted with the rest of the design concept, he had thought of manufacturing this drone as part of the civilian line. Tall cylinders with 4 arms and treads contrast with blocky-legged machines with false heads and 4 to 8 limbs. The Centipede hummed to life as he pushed a button on the console. As it triggered, one of his screens switched to the Centipede's camera view automatically. Izuku glanced back to see his armored form on the screen as he gazed down at his creation. Grinning, he went back to his computer and started guiding the Centipede toward the Sapia laboratory through the tunnel. He had to see it even if he wouldn't be able to walk inside it for some time. Before the Centipede started to move, the screen displayed the lab's interior. The drone's armor moved to provide the legs a full range of motion as it started to run on a set of short legs. As the Centipede got closer, he passed R&B units, who were working diligently to make the tunnel more functional for him. In order to save Izuku from using the lights, the drone descended while the camera switched to night vision mode. The drone momentarily faltered as some ground beneath it moved. The Centipede's legs shuffled beneath the metal plates as Izuku scowled. He watched as the drone moved through the tunnel, the dirt moving gradually past the camera before sliding away as fast as it had come. He continued to type commands to keep his droids on time while keeping his eyes on the various screens. The Centipede was going quickly, occasionally extending its legs to accelerate its dirt slide. The Centipede would arrive at the laboratory after nearly 45 minutes, but Izuku grinned when it arrived. The drone came very close to stopping. In order to help the R&Bs locate a suitable entry to connect with, the camera records a collection of issues. Izuku didn't want to break through walls because he didn't want to risk destroying the fragile electronics inside. He commanded the Centipede to proceed, cautiously moving along the laboratory's metal shell. Then he noticed it. There was a tunnel that led out of the laboratory, and a small crew of R&Bs were busy sawing into it. As the Centipede drew closer, Izuku rapidly thought and typed in more commands, the R&Bs retreating. The Centipede shifted, exposing its legs on the back half while its front half shot upward. A low-intensity laser fired from the drone's underbelly, extending a short barrel outward. Compared to the saws, the beam started cutting into the metal far more quickly. He stopped after the beam had completed its downward journey. After allowing it to cool for a bit, he fired again, starting from the same location but aiming sideways instead of downward. A neat square was gradually being carved out of the entry tunnel's metal. As the R&Bs started removing the component and putting more to make sure the frame would be solid, Izuku stopped once more. Izuku gave the Centipede the order to return to its low position and let the droids do their business. As the droids retreated and the opening was easily sealed, he grinned. Due to the size of the aperture, the Centipede had to climb a little bit as it approached. As data started to move across other screens, the camera moved, capturing details. Izuku stopped while the camera studied its left. A human skeleton, hunched over, with a fragment of fallen metal splintering its neck. It was adorned with its ID and the decaying remnants of an old lab coat. Despite its antiquity, it is still noticeable. As he examined the dead guy, Izuku allowed a period of stillness to pass. The remains of the man were gradually removed off the door by a group of R units as they entered. Izuku merely observed one of them stealing the ID, and a card from the skeletal hand of the deceased. He had the Centipede lean forward and connect to a neighboring console while he let them to do their job. The entire apparatus appeared antique, and the monitor was covered in dust. However, his sensors revealed that the lab was still receiving little quantities of power. Izuku had to blink to realize that it had remained powerful for 200 years. The incredible technology of the past never stopped to astound him. He allowed his AI get into the lab's systems. The hardware's age and condition allow for a fast run-through with few issues. Izuku allowed information to slowly seep in as his AI performed its function. After securing remote access between the labs, he had the Centipede disconnect from the console and return to the location where the skeleton had been. The man was being given a modest funeral by the R&Bs. Izuku turned to face the ID. Still in the grasp of another R unit, the man's name was Aizawa Richards, and he estimated that he was half Japanese and half American. Izuku allowed the Centipede to approach the location, where the body had been replaced with the silhouette of a metal door with a card reader next to it. If he wanted to open it without cutting through anything else, he'd have to route the electricity from his own lab down here. As R&Bs moved behind him with more supplies to be built down the tunnel, Izuku gradually started punching out additional commands. He then had the R unit follow the centipede as it made its way to the door. The R unit crept up to the card reader while holding the card in its claw. As he had his AI, it swiped the card. Examine the door. Izuku held his breath when the card was swept. A hard grinding sound reverberated from the years of neglect as the door slid down. As the centipede's camera edged out the lab's details, Izuku exhaled tensely. He entered a lengthy hallway that was covered in layers of dust from 2 centuries of inactivity. As Izuku watched the corridor go to a security gate, he dispatched the centipede forward. As R&Bs started working along the corridor, Izuku remarked, "They definitely didn't fool around." The lone R came over and inserted the card into the reader on the security gate. The years rendered the speakers unusable as a jumbled message played. Izuku's AI proceeded deeper, cautiously breaking through the security fence. Then Izuku nearly jumped back when the door opened. In front of the drone, a heap of skeletal remains sagged. As Izuku utilized the centipede's other scanners to see how far the pile extended, dust was thrown up. All 5 lab openings looked like this, if All for One's data was to be believed. According to historical accounts and statistics from All for One, the Sapia laboratory was destroyed by an earthquake rather than the devastation brought on by World War III. The lab was still fully manned when the earthquake struck. There was damage to the elevator and tunnels that led out of it. The individuals within were trapped, some of them starved, some suffocated, and some were killed by the falling debris. Izuku turned to face his scanners again. They all perished as the carbon dioxide filled the entire space. As the R&Bs started to carefully remove the skeletons, he remained silent for another moment. He admired these scientists, and they weren't just him. There were custodians, security, and other employees who just worked there. As the final skeletons were taken out, he started crying. He leaned back in his chair and inhaled deeply. This scene would be repeated much too often for him. This laboratory served as a mass grave in addition to being a time capsule of obsolete technology. Izuku delivered a command to the R&Bs, whispering, "Best, give them a burial." He ordered the centipede to keep moving forward, farther into the labyrinth of metal doors and corridors. Since the only way Izuku could see anything in the lab was through the centipede's camera's night vision, it felt like he was playing a horror game. As the lab was confined by the earthquake, every bit of dust and metal fragments simply revealed another tale of catastrophe. One of his screens shifted, and his phone pinged. Izuku turned to see the laboratory's correct layout on the screen. There were 6 floors, some of which featured chambers that extended over many levels. In the middle of the laboratory was a huge elevator that could accommodate a group of brick units. The 5 tunnels that connected the lab to the outside world were easily accessible from the fire escapes on each level. There was an emergency staircase adjacent to each tunnel, which led to a different elevator. The lab was made up of 5 corridors that connected the exits to the central elevator, with rooms arranged in a consistent manner along each corridor. Izuku was now aware of the purpose of each room and the contents that could be found there. The centipede stopped and veered to the right at his command. The words, "Augmentics Testing Area," were faded on a sign adjacent to a big door that stood in its way. The centipede's R unit walked up the wall and inserted the card into the door's reader. 2 B units trailed behind, and when the door had finished sliding open, they pulled it out of the foyer. Stalking ahead, the centipede looked around the room. A room divided by protective sheeting and several monitors were scattered about. Izuku narrowed his eyes and looked back at the layout display. The main power room was directly accessible through a little access hatch in the room. With its scanners turned on, he had the centipede lumber forward in search of the hatch. He then noticed a second skeleton. With its hands on the throat of the other, this one loomed over them. Izuku simply used a winch to examine it. The choker included an outer frame that extended along the remainder of his body and a pair of metallic legs that extended down from his thighs. The only clothing the choked was wearing was trousers and a ripped lab coat. A shard of sharp metal was sticking out of the choker's left rib cage. When Izuku comprehended what he had just discovered, he let out an uneven breath and sighed. He made the centipede look somewhere else and moaned, "This is even worse. He can let the R&Bs handle that corpse." Finally, he discovered the hatch hidden beneath a stack of rotting papers, which pleased him. A small team of R units quickly began tearing it apart. Shortly thereafter, he had the centipede leave the room. He might allow the AI steal whatever data that was still stored on the system. Hopefully, the R units will have arrived at the generator room by the time the centipede gets to the elevator. As new data kept coming in, he let the drone continue, glancing momentarily to the other panels. He could do so much with it, but it was for another time. He must ensure that there is no connection between his criminal persona and his civilian identity. Then he heard a movement. Desperate to locate the source, his eyes flew across the screen. Although Izuku would rather be careful, the centipede was unaffected. He didn't want it to collapse on the lab after he had just arrived because it had been gradually crushed by 200 years of stacking dirt and rock. The centipede then proceeded on its voyage. When it came face to face with a big pile of dirt, it replaced its night vision with its front-mounted flashlights. Izuku gazed at it from his monitor and swore. He ordered the issue units in the area to start searching through it right now. As he had the centipede turn around, he could feel his anxiety and tension rising. He glanced back at the screen, scanning the entire lab setup for any points of access. Since the fire exits were ladders rather than stairs, they were now ineffective. There were not many interior tunnels or access vents in the lab for him to use. Everything would take time to adequately secure everything, but he had wanted to see the entire lab. With a sigh, he unlocked a second door without bothering to check what was within. Only to leap back when something briefly flashed across the screen before vanishing. Izuku massaged his eyes and removed his helmet. Was there something else moving down there that he had just noticed? Was the laboratory a haunting place for some kind of terrifying creature? His astonishment increased as he turned back to his screen and saw the centipede scanner had minor damage on the left side. Izuku mumbled as he turned to face the tunnel leading to the lab, just like a horror movie. 2 brick units moved to stand watch at the tunnel after he issued a command. Then he went back to the centipede and simultaneously sent a command to all of the R&B units that were there. The centipede moved ahead, lighting the area with its lights and camera. It was a robotics lab of some kind. Izuku could see that the lab was multi-story, with the only thing preventing someone from plunging 3 stories was a little translucent guard. As a lone skeleton leaned back in the solitary chair, desks and monitors were strewn across the floor. Izuku whispered as he ordered the centipede to move forward, not touching that. Izuku's own facilities were dwarfed by the vast robotics lab beyond the rail. It had a regal quality that made Izuku smile, despite being dilapidated and crumbling. Once he had this location operational, he would do anything. As the centipede looked around the room, he paid little attention. As Izuku took it all in, a new arrangement was projected onto a different monitor. According to reports, the facility housed 3 such labs. Izuku could see all of the conveyor belts and the thoughtfully positioned equipment, all of which were designed to help build a brighter future for everybody. He saw a tiny glow in the corner of the camera just as he was ready to let it go on. The centipede turned back and used the glow to magnify the area. The radiance appeared to shift as R&B units started to follow into the room. Then it jumped up. As a machine landed next the centipede, Izuku silently exhaled. It was a box with 4 legs that was made to look like a grasshopper's legs. The head of the monster was a big camera with a light dot next to it, and there were a pair of arms close by. Izuku held his breath attentively as it moved toward the centipede. The drone was struck and sent back by the machine's swing. As he watched the machine tearing like a mad dog into the surrounding R&B units, Izuku assumed charge. With minimal effort, its limbs smashed the construction droids into tiny fragments. As the centipede was rushed by the machine, Izuku frantically sent commands. The machine dodged the laser when Izuku fired it. It struck the centipede head-on and started hitting it with its back legs. All Izuku could do was watch in horror as his machine was brutally destroyed. Only the camera is still intact. At that moment, an issue model entered the room. The machine whirled, as if preparing to attack once more. Izuku watched as the issue model fried the machine with a direct bolt of electricity, causing a brief hiccup in the camera feed. As more R&B units invaded the room, the machine lay dying, its light flickering. Izuku merely observed the execution of the machine and the remnants of the centipede. Before shutting off the centipede stream, he entered one last set of directives. Leaning back, he let the abrupt sequence of events to fully register. He had just come across outdated technology. His tech just got kicked in the ass by that ancient tech. The machine was only halted in time because of his specialist weapons. He got to his feet, allowing the R&Bs to resume their task of navigating the laboratory. He needed to disassemble something to discover how it worked. Izuku's gaze lowered to the table before him. He broke his centipede drone into 3 pieces. A number of its legs were hanging by their wires, and its armor was twisted beyond use. He turned to face another table, where the ancient device that had ruined his centipede drone was resting on its side. Izuku took his time approaching it, gathering equipment along the way. A wave of nostalgia swept through him as he ran his palm over the machine. He ran his hand along the edges, along the screws and the holes. He carefully inserted his screwdriver head and started twisting. He disassembled the gadget, piece by piece, using the careful hands of a surgeon. He examined every aspect of it in detail. Each screw used, each wiring segment, and the limb assembly. The camera in his helmet captured all of them. He held up the circuit board of the machine as he disassembled the final parts. The words, Sapia Labs, were bolded on the side. After setting the circuit board aside, he focused on the legs. Instead of being formed of metal like the rest of the body, they were made of plastic of some kind. He quickly bent the largest piece, noticing the way pressure caused it to flex gently. He gave the leg to AB unit in the area. As the machine took the part and moved on, he gave the order, get the material analyzed. He turned to face the disassembled machine again, carefully examining each component. Izuku picked up the circuit board once again and said, You're the first step to greatness. He moved to the computer, leaving the table behind. After attaching a little cable to the board, he let an AI begin to go through the system. As data started to display on one of the screens, he mumbled, Now let's see what you were hiding. He furrowed his brow when the machine's designation came up. He turned back to the parts on the table and exclaimed, A herding droid. It appears that the machine was made to herd agricultural animals by pushing them forward with its legs and allowing them to jump so they could keep up with herds that were moving. The machine's programming wasn't perfected because it was still in beta. Izuku wiped his face and mumbled, A herding droid, capable of kicking metal into scrap. By itself, the creature had destroyed his drone and a number of R&B units. Izuku pondered what may have been and muttered, the future could have been much crazier. Eyeing the built-in clock on his display, he murmured, Well, I only have so much time. He had to go home in just 1 more hour. After entering a command, he turned to face the R&Bs that were still in the lab. In case there were any additional surprises, he had configured the issue models to serve as guards. He got up and turned back to the broken herding droid and the wrecked centipede drone, a small gathering of R&Bs encircling the tables. As R&B models began repairing the centipede, he replied, Be back tomorrow. They didn't even touch the table, let alone come into contact with the herding droid. Izuku prepared his legs for the impending elevator rush as he left the lab. Nedzu worked on his computer, typing. He calculated the number of employees required for this year's UA with a casual demeanor. Athletic festival. Despite the attacks of villains, he was not interested in displaying weakness. It wouldn't be hard to recruit more police officers and heroes because many of them owed their careers to the UA ultimately. As Toshinori entered the room, he sent out another email. Nedzu said, Hello Yagi, what can I get for you? With a simple sigh, Yagi sat down on one of the office seats. Have students been mocking your civilian form? Asked Nedzu. Yagi answered, No, nothing like that. Then what is it? I am rather busy at the moment. Asked Nedzu. Yagi coughed up some blood and trailed off. I believe that you may need to expand our current staff even further, stated Yagi. Nedzu asked, Really, more permanent staff? Indeed, it's clean that the students are benefiting from the gentleman's lessons rather well. Not to mention how the support course has taken to the Duchess programming courses rather quickly. Yagi elaborated. So, you want me to find more convertible individuals to bring into UA's fold for the benefit of the students? Nedzu responded. Yagi rubbed his neck awkwardly and said, Yes, I know you're in the middle of contracting more security, so I decided to bring it up. As Yagi got up and bowed before heading out, Nedzu said, Well, you have made a good choice, Yagi. You may want to hurry though, your next class starts soon and they need their teacher. The door banged and Nedzu shook his head. Even though he is a superb hero, he can be a complete idiot. He had been doing so before Yagi entered the scene. He went back to his computer and launched a little application that collected the top options for employees. Then he saw a large group. Among its prominent members are Mr. Compress, the already captured Seltzer, and the now retired gentle criminal. The Hooded Guild is a group of phantom thieves and anti-villains. An ideal starting point for hiring new employees. Bringing the others into his fold would be quite simple if Gentle Criminal and Labrava were the archetypes of the Hooded Guild. He could, of course, begin investigating further, sacred locations. Nedzu took out a second file, titled, Dropouts. All of the students on the lengthy list had either departed UA voluntarily or were banished, thereafter turning into vigilantes. With a groan, he scrolled over a huge list of names that had been grayed out before coming to a name in plain black writing. Nedzu scowled, then walked farther down the list and came to a halt. The Night Haunters were the largest group of dropouts that existed, a team of effective and largely impartial vigilantes under the leadership of Cypher, a former hero. They provided other vigilantes around the prefectures with more strength and information. Since Cypher had been a personal pupil of his who retired to watch over his children, he knew the man well. As he placed the Night Haunters in a different file with the Hooded Guild, Nedzu grinned. He then took out a second one and started looking through it. There were a lot of extra heroes in this file that had recently graduated from UA and carried on with their vocations till the present day. With this file, he had a vast array to pick from. Some names were simply handed along, while others were added to the separate file. Ready to do what was required for his kids and hero society at large, he proceeded to assemble his list. Several barrels featuring the shabby depictions of various heroes stood in front of All for One, which was situated in front of a shooting range. He shouted and directed a number of energy quirks into an air cannon he was holding. He released it with a single snap, and the shot pierced a barrel that bore All Might's face. A mound of scrap trailed behind the barrel as it departed in a gaping mouth. He cut a barrel with a Maruko face into 3 parts and repeated the process with the subsequent barrel. He fired repeatedly, showing little mercy as each target was left torn and broken. A foe simply grinned ferociously, seeing each barrel as their own hero. All the mayhem he was capable of causing, all the terrible force at his fingertips. 2 Numu came up, pulling the mangled targets away. A foe clenched his wrists, flexed his back, and turned his head back. All Might, that blonde oaf, was slowly tearing his organs out with his bare hands, and he could picture him on the ground, hopeless. He could still feel the warmth and the sensation of blood. He can do it much better the next time because he has seen it before. Izuku completed getting his AI ready for his journey. For the week he was away, his warehouse was prepared to take care of itself. Silently, his villain lab would be hard at work getting Sapia ready for his return. After his journey to Island, he intended to abandon his excursion inside the laboratory. What would he discover at Island? Perhaps he will get some ideas for his future device. Perhaps something he might use for his nefarious operations. His phone pinging made him stop thinking. He took it out after looking down and discovered a message from his auntiers. As he opened it, he saw that he was receiving multiple paragraphs of text. He glanced over it, absorbing the essentials. Phase 2 of Project Cell was prepared to start. As they entered the airport in the automobile, Eri held his hand. As the hero operated the vehicle, Inko was sleeping on the front passenger seat. Eri kept her gaze on the road while Izuku leaned back a little in his chair. Their journey to Island started today. JNR. They had to go. And, of course, Mochi behind. Junior just required more room, and they wanted someone to keep an eye on Mochi when they were away. Eri was upset about it, but after Izuku gave him an explanation, he was content. Izuku glanced outside as the automobile came to a stop. They were in a private area that is often only used by high-ranking heroes and significant political personalities. Izuku went out first, followed by his sister and mother. Another member had just gone through security, so staff came over and grabbed their bags for them. They were through in no time, and with the exception of Eri's slight hesitancy, they passed without any problems. The aircraft wasn't very big in comparison to a typical commercial flight. After entering, the 3 of them waited for the flight to begin. While they waited, Eri nestled against his side. She was anxious because it was her first time flying. Izuku had flown once before, at a very young age. His father had taken him and Inko to the United States to visit his place of employment. He recalled that the takeoff and landing were a little rough, but otherwise everything was smooth. The plane did eventually take off. As the plane trembled, Eri gripped his hand. As the ride evened out and Izuku looked for a television in the seat in front of him, she relaxed. Screen, quickly grabbing Eri's attention and showing her a movie as the plane was flying in the direction of Island. Eri released his hand once again when the plane touched down. As they cautiously stood up, Izuku gave her a little smile while looking down at her. Just to be safe, Inko approached them and examined them both. All right, before we get off the plane I want to tell you both that there's a surprise waiting for us at Island. I won't tell you two what it is, but I know you'll like it. Inko stated as she cleaned Eri's shoulder. Izuku furrowed his brow in amazement at his mother. Holding her plush rabbit close to her, Eri simply cocked her head. When Inko smiled at them, Izuku simply ignored it. It will undoubtedly be excellent if she surprises you. As before, they went through a quick security check before leaving the aircraft. Because the checks were performed by robots, Eri felt a little less terrified this time. Izuku simply gazed at the vista of Island while the family packed their bags. He loves Island despite his criticism of Hero Society and the similarities he has made. With the exception of his warehouse, it was one of just 3 locations on Earth actively advancing technology. He could appreciate their fixation on quirks. Success would necessitate normalizing such disarray. They were enhancing what we all had, and he was attempting to revive the technologies of the past. They went on, and Izuku stopped talking to himself. People of many kinds, including financiers, innovators, heroes, and many others, were moving freely and carelessly through the entry. As they went on, he could feel Eri holding his hand tightly. Then Inko halted. Izuku looked at her bewilderedly, then turned to face her. A lone man sat in the outside dining area of a local restaurant. Izuku can clearly see his brilliant green eyes and curling black hair. The man's eyes widened as he turned to face them, and then a smile appeared on his lips. Izuku turned back to his mother after he waved them over. His dad was present. Eri gave him a questioning look, and Inko only grinned mischievously. Izuku looked reassuringly at his younger sister and then pointed to the eatery. As Inko started to approach Hisashi, she did the same. One of the staff members escorted the family to Hisashi's table after greeting them. Izuku's father sat silently for a moment before they all took their seats. He hasn't spoken to his father in 2 months, and he never anticipated seeing him at Island. Hisashi grinned and remarked, "Hey, it's nice to talk in person after so long." Izuku said, "Yeah, lots of things have happened." Hisashi rubbed the back of his neck. I know, I've been trapped by work. How has yours been doing, Izuku?" he said. Izuku inhaled deeply and said in a weary voice, "Busy." After giving a nod, Hisashi went to face Eri. Given the small girl's striking resemblance to her mother and a hint of her father, one may assume the table was occupied by a whole family. Eri only gave Hisashi a questioning glance as he got to his feet. He walked gently up to her, then knelt down to give her a hug. As Eri leaned into the embrace, he remarked, "It's nice to finally meet my daughter." Izuku bent toward Inko. He inquired, "How much does he know?" Inko smirked and said, "He has her story. He always wanted a daughter to dot on anyways." Hisashi went back to his seat, and Izuku simply nodded. Eri was getting closer to grinning now. A few more. When the staff came, they were given menus. Izuku was okay with this because Island's expo was subordinated to some much-needed family time. He was free to enjoy this place for the remainder of the week. As Eri began to lean in Hisashi's direction and ask for assistance selecting a menu item, he grinned. Present-day statistics. It will take an estimated 7 days, 14 hours, and 53 minutes for the master to return. Project cell progress. 2% finished. The restoration of Sapia is 47% complete. Sapia droid material analysis. 68% complete. Achieved 59% of the current deal quota. -74% of the Sapia data has been acquired. The Legion project is 4% complete. Addition model production efficiency. 65%. Unit count as of right now. Model units. -135R. -108 units of the B model. -66 units of brick models. Units of head model -11. -38 units of issue model. -1 model shockwave mech suit. -5 units of Ontier model. 3 units of Echo models. A civil production facility has a warning intruder. Getting countermeasures ready. Hawks watched the tiny staff at work and simply sighed. The HSPC had Midoriya serve as a guard for an infiltrator unit while he was away. Their goal was to obtain the young inventor's patents and acquire his current robotics data. Give the young man a shock when he gets home and discovers that his entire company has been stolen. He has never had to protect one of these groups before. At the moment, he was waiting for their tech-savvy quirk user to break into the child's software outside the warehouse. He has been standing here for the past half hour, yet it looks like it was a quick job. Wondering why they had been taking so long, he texted the group. Then, in the distance, he heard an explosion. He glanced over and hurried to the scene, pocketing his phone. He could only see flames and hear the sound of concrete crumbling. Hawks stared as a whole hardware shop sank into the earth, his face gradually scarred by shock. Then there was a second explosion. Hawks looked back and saw a big plume of smoke rising from a few districts away. Then there were more explosions. He saw a number of buildings simply sink into the earth. As emergency personnel were called, people were yelling and in a panic. His hero training kicked in as Hawks flew down. Even though he was sent to protect those robbers, he still had a heroic image to maintain. Glancing down at his phone, Garci scowled. Without any regard, their guard had merely inquired as to why it was taking so long. As if he could explain to him the precise amount of time required to steal from a tech prodigy. You had to be careful since even with strong technopathy quirks, one mistake may cost you everything. Garci asked his teammates, progress. While massaging his temples, Stanford responded, I'm still working on hacking, but his AI is giving me a headache. Chopper poked the warehouse's exterior wall and retorted, the doors are locked to the rest of the lab, I can't just cut my way in without triggering his security. Haggard, another male, said, come on Stanford, how hard is it to fight with some kid's homemade AI? Stanford retorted, shut it, I need to concentrate to get this right. Quiet all of you, whatever this kid has is high-end. We'd normally be done by now but we haven't even gotten into the warehouse yet. Garci said. A loud explosion in the backdrop cut off any argument. Haggard watched the smoke grow and murmured, what kind of villain? As he readied his quirk for battle, Chopper remarked, a foolish one, or a brave one. Stanford paused as he dropped onto his back and his nose started to bleed. I said shut it, you. Ah, Stanford, inquired Garci. Stanford answered, those AI they kicked me out. Haggard touched the warehouse wall, and Garci shook his head. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, his knees gave way and he collapsed to the floor. Flaring quirks and drawing weapons, the others leapt backward. Each gave way and fell to their knees, yet it was all for nothing. Garci looked around and saw some boxy machines coming toward them. The sheer amount of voltage coursing through their bodies prevented him from persuading Stanford to stop them. Garci did nothing except watch his body continue to tremble. A different one, with a somewhat round shell enclosing its body, approached. Before his body began to heat up, Garci attempted to get to his feet. Stanford tried to spit blood out of his mouth, but the machine rammed a leg into his chest, causing it to fry instantly. The machine did the same to Haggard and Chopper, leaving Garci powerless. The machine turned toward him, and for the first time in a long time he felt terror. The machine above him was the last thing he saw. Over his face was a big metallic leg. Hawks went back to the warehouse and picked himself up. The villains behind the attacks were never apprehended. They were too quick and too sudden. He discovered the team in disarray. There was a small hole on the side and the walls were charred. The squad was nowhere to be found, and neither was their equipment. The scene was covered in dried blood. He searched the area for any indication of their whereabouts. He took out his phone and opened the tracking app, disregarding the previous message from Garci. Nothing. Their phones simply vanished. They weren't broken or dead. Hawks glanced around, pausing to gaze at the blood below. It appeared to have been burned onto the surface, as it was dry. A portion of the warehouse had been damaged, and the ground had fractures in it. Inside the warehouse, Hawks could see that 2 PAMs were already fixing the damage and nothing else. He mumbled, what the hell? When he failed to locate the team, there were other reports, he would discover. A lot of thieves and equipment would also go missing.
I will continue this story in next part. Till then, bye bye.